Chapter 133. The students of the academy were gathering urgently. But the higher-ups were still in a meeting. In the conference room of the Sky Academy, the atmosphere was oppressive and solemn. Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, vice headmaster, Gu Yunxia, the director of teaching, and Chao Huazhang, the head of the tactical staff department, in the entire Sky Academy, except for Tribulation, who was still in closed-door training, almost all the higher-ups of the academy, including the leaders of the major course groups, had arrived. The conference room was crowded with people. However, Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, was not sitting in the main seat. Not to mention the main seat, he was not even in the seats near the main seat. Several old and middle-aged men in military uniforms or casual clothes lined up one by one around the main seat. When it came to Zhuang Huayang's seat, it was already in the middle of the line. No matter what system or level of the conference in Zhongzhou State, seniority was extremely important, and people should take the corresponding position. As the headmaster of the Sky Academy and the general of the Special Warfare System in Zhongzhou State, Zhuang Huayang could only be in the middle. It could be seen that the standard of this conference was very high. There was silence in the conference room. Everyone held a list in their hands and looked at it attentively. The names on the list were not long, but each of the names carried great weight. Therefore, even after everyone looked at it several times, no one spoke. Let's talk about our views. In the main seat of the conference room, a powerful old man in military uniform silently put down the list in his hand, glanced around, and said in a deep voice. The old man looked to be in his 60s or 70s, but he didn't look like he was past his prime. His hair was white, and because of his old age, he wore a pair of reading glasses when he looked at the name list. However, the eyes behind the glasses were extremely fierce and dignified. As his eyes swept across the room, a heavy pressure suddenly whistled through the conference room. Everyone subconsciously straightened their bodies, and their expressions became more and more serious. There was still silence in the conference room. The old man frowned slightly and became more dignified. It was a kind of momentum that had nothing to do with martial arts, but was developed because of his long-term high position. He was tough, iron-blooded, and domineering. His every move seemed to be the law. "Old Zhuang, you talk." His eyes finally fell on Zhuang Huayang's face, and he said in a calm tone. Zhuang Huayang straightened up subconsciously and coughed. This meeting was not an ordinary chat. As the principal of the Sky Academy, his words carried weight. He might be old enough in terms of seniority, but in terms of power, he was really not in the front. Now that the old man on the main seat asked him to talk, he had to talk. Because, in a sense, the old man on the main seat was the real #1 person in the military of Zhongzhou State. The Special Warfare Group of Zhongzhou State was actually led by Gu Xingyun, but at least on the surface, the old man in front of him was the supreme leader of the Special Warfare Group of Zhongzhou State. Qi Baitsong, a member of the Decision-Making Committee of Zhongzhou State and the Executive Minister of the Army Headquarters. He was the standing minister of the military, not the deputy minister. When the academics took over the supreme power of Zhongzhou State from the Prince Group united with the Special Warfare Group to push Qi Baitsong to the current position and remove the word deputy behind the standing minister. How cruel this move was! Those who were not involved could not feel the pain at all. If the academics were not in an extremely difficult situation, they would not be in a hurry to cooperate with the giant group and the Dongcheng clan. All kinds of thoughts kept flashing in Zhuang Huayang's mind, but he remained calm on the surface. He said with a calm smile, "I fully agree with the battle plan of the Army Headquarters. The Sky Academy will fully cooperate with us. The list of the second batch of elites will be reported to the Army Headquarters and Kunlun City within 3 days." Qi Baitsong nodded. Although what he said was hollow, at least he showed his attitude. His dignified eyes turned and finally fell on an ordinary-looking middle-aged man beside him with extremely sharp eyes. "Dongsheng, what do you think?" Qi Baitsong, the standing minister of the Army Headquarters. Yi Dongsheng, the god of Army of Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State. These were the only 3 military marshals in the military today. Although Gu Xingyun and the newly promoted Gu Qianchuan in the special warfare system were also marshals, the concealment of the special warfare system meant that they could not be exposed to the public. Therefore, the three military marshals became the three well-known figures with the highest military ranks in Zhongzhou State. One represented the Special Warfare Group, one represented the Southeast Group, and one represented the Giant Group. Although they all had different standpoints, now was the time for full cooperation. Even if they had their own thoughts, they had the same goal, so the difference in standpoints was faint. Yi Dongsheng looked at the list in front of him silently and did not speak for a while. The list for each person was not long, but it was definitely not short either. At the top was the list of the spectators. Wuji Sword Sect of East Island. Jifeng Sword Sage of East Island. Huan Kong, the Lord of Fantasy World. Chaos, the Commander of Knights Templars. Jiang Qinyan, the Second Master of the Jiang family of South America. 5 Invincible Realm Experts. This was the most eye-catching name on the whole list. Of course, the list of those who came to watch the ceremony was not just these 5 people or the 5 superpowers. However, people from other superpowers all sent experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to watch the ceremony. Although they were not light at the moment, they were all people who could be temporarily put aside. Below the list of the spectators was the internal list of Zhongzhou State. The list involved the Sky Academy, the Deep Sea Academy, the Border Praetorian Corps, the 4 Theaters of War, the Shadow Sting Army, the Beihai Military Region, Kunlun City, and various special operations bureaus. There were so many names, many of which were very familiar to Yi Dongsheng. He looked at them silently. After a long time, he smiled and said, "There's no problem with the plan. As long as it's executed properly, there won't be any problems in the early stage. As for what will happen in the future, we will make the next plan in Zhongzhou State based on the intelligence from the front line. We'll deal with it when it comes." Qi Beizong nodded with satisfaction and subconsciously stroked his gray hair. Yi Dongsheng was known as the god of army of the empire. He was a real expert in arranging troops and formations. If he said there was no problem, it might not mean that the plan was really perfect, but it represented the judgment of the peak-level tactical vision of Zhongzhou State to a certain extent. "Wudi, what's the situation of the Border Control Corps? Do you have anything to say about this plan?" Dongqing Wudi was sitting next to Qi Beizong, face to face with Yi Dongsheng. Hearing this, he shook his head and said blandly, "The 50,000 elites transferred from the 5 subordinate armies of the Border Control Corps will arrive in Huading before dawn. What I'm worried about now is not the domestic situation, but East Island. This is the top priority of this battle. Is it a little insecure for Tribulation to lead the team?" Qi Beizong was silent. Tribulation leading the team to East Island was not a perfect plan, but it was relatively the best one. Although the most powerful assassin in Zhongzhou State was not on the list of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State, almost no one under the 4 Invincible Realm experts was his match. With such strength, he was the most suitable candidate to go to East Island. In the past 2 decades, the Invincible Realm experts of the previous generation in Jade Pool and Kunlun City died, the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai died of illness, the Li family was imprisoned at the border, and Li Kuangtu committed treason. This could be said to be the most difficult period for the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. The special warfare system was not short of time, but with the death of the older generation, it was an indisputable fact that the younger generation had not yet grown up. Zhongzhou State, known as the most powerful country in the world, had only 4 Invincible Realm experts as strategic resources, which was only one more than the Invincible Realm experts on the surface in East Island. If Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and Siducangyue had all entered the Divine List and occupied the 1st, 4th, and 15th places, such an embarrassing special warfare system of Zhongzhou State might have already encountered strong challenges from the outside world. Today, Zhongzhou State was prosperous, but the special warfare system was in decline. Although there was no obvious provocation, in recent years, the elites of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State encountered more and more resistance when they performed tasks in the outside world. As Zhongzhou State grew stronger and stronger in military power, some neighboring countries gradually became more and more uneasy. Instigated by some Western countries with ulterior motives, several neighboring countries and Zhongzhou state had constant frictions in the dark world, and some conflicts had become more and more intense. In the past, when Zhongzhou state was not the most powerful country in the world, it was jointly constrained by many neighboring countries. Now, when Zhongzhou state was strong and the strength of the special warfare system shrank, it was also pulled by many neighboring countries, and even covetously eyed it. Zhongzhou state needed a chance to break this increasingly difficult situation, which was the common demand of all major groups in Zhongzhou state. And to break this situation, East Island, which was composed of 3 big islands and countless small islands, had a land area of only 300,000 square kilometers, which was less than 1/30th of Zhongzhou state, but had 3 invincible realm experts, was the key of the key. Among the many countries near Zhongzhou state, East Island was the most powerful country in terms of comprehensive strength, economy, military power, and martial arts. East Island had always been a chess piece cultivated by the Western powers and used to check and balance Zhongzhou state. This ambitious country could perfectly unite Gaoshan state, Annan state, Heng state, and other countries to fight against Zhongzhou state. Especially when the strength of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state was gradually weakening, their ambition had become more and more unstoppable. The master of Samsara Palace challenged the god of war of Zhongzhou state. It was the battle of the invincible realm. 2 of the 3 invincible realm experts of East Island came to watch the ceremony as soon as possible, which was enough to show the deep attitude behind this move. As long as they could control or suppress the development of the special warfare power of East Island, the other countries around Zhongzhou state were nothing to worry about. And the Western powers were too far away to reach out to deal with Zhongzhou state. In this way, Zhongzhou state had a lot of time to stabilize its backyard and regain its position. The Night Spirit organization was destroyed in Billi state. But people who reached a certain level in the dark world knew that although the headquarters of the Night Spirit was in Billi state, their deepest foundation was in East Island. Tian Ling and Tian Xen, the 2 fallen invincible realm experts, had been secretly serving the East Island government for many years. Now that the Night Spirit was destroyed, their countless foundations and resources were all concentrated in East Island. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were half of the special warfare system of East Island. And what Zhongzhou state wanted this time was the special warfare system of East Island. The master of Samsara Palace challenged the god of war of Zhongzhou state. It was true at the beginning. But as old Master Dongqing said, Gu Xingyun dared to fight, but he dared not, or was unwilling to, fight to the death with the master of Samsara Palace. But because of his identity, he couldn't really be timid and avoid a fight. So how to express his meaning obscurely and get the approval of the master of Samsara Palace became his thing to consider. By Yuming entering the Sky Academy was only a small part of it. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City would also find their own positions of real power after this battle. There were a lot of deals behind the scenes. These were the bargaining chips that Gu Xingyun gave to not fight to the death. The master of Samsara Palace naturally agreed with such a deal. So the original fight to the death directly and secretly evolved into the plot of Zhongzhou state. The fight to the death had become a show. While most people were focused on this battle of the invincible realm, the main purpose of Zhongzhou state was to attack the special warfare system of East Island and detonate a fierce battle in the dark world in East Island. So from the very beginning, the fight to the death and the secret action of Zhongzhou state, including the competition of the Heavenly Sons, were the same thing. More than a month passed. The date of the battle was approaching. Zhongzhou state also secretly established the Snowdance Corps, the Border Control Corps, the 4 theaters of operations, Kunlun City, Sai City, Shadow Sect, Shadow Sting Force, Beihai Military Region, the Special Operations Bureaus and Independent Action Groups of Zhongzhou state all transferred the most elite forces to join the Snowdance Corps. In a month, the current size of the Snowdance Corps had exceeded 15,000 people. The Corps was divided into 3 parts. Gu Qianchuan led the team to the west and guarded Western Europe. Situ Tsangyue went straight to North America to contain the fantasy world. The Knights Templars in Western Europe, like the fantasy world and Knight Spirit in North America, were secretly supported by other countries behind the scenes. The conflicts between the superpowers in the Dark World were more or less related to the games between the countries behind them. Sidu Zhangyue and Gu Qianquan led the team to Western Europe and North America. Their purpose was not to fight with the Knights Templars and the fantasy world to the death. They only needed to contain the main forces of the two superpowers in their homeland and prevent them from supporting East Island. Such a task sounded simple, but only experts of the Invincible Realm could do it. Zhongzhou State could only send Sidu Zhangyue and Gu Qianquan. All the real plots of Zhongzhou State were concentrated in East Island. The two Invincible Realm experts of East Island came to Zhongzhou State to watch the ceremony. It was foreseeable that the two of them could not go back before there was a clear result in East Island. Even Huan Kong, the ruler of the fantasy world, and Chaos, the commander of the Knights Templars, who were most likely to support East Island, were the same. They were plotting against the special warfare system of East Island and the status of Zhongzhou State in the Dark World decades later. Although Tribulation was strong, how could he deal with the supreme ninja of the Invincible Realm and Evil, the killer of the Invincible Realm in East Island? Thinking about it, it seemed that it was really not safe. But in addition to Tribulation, who else could lead this operation? It was not that no one thought of Li Honghe, who was far away at the border, but this candidate could only be thought of at most. Everyone knew that it was completely impossible for Li Honghe to come out again. Even Samsara was opposed to this matter. Wang Tianzong guarded Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun and the master of Samsara Palace acted. Sidu Zhangyue and Gu Qianquan went to Western Europe and North America respectively. Only Tribulation was the most qualified person to lead the army in East Island. But as for whether he could control or greatly limit the special warfare system of East Island in a short time, no one was sure about this. Tribulation is under a bit of pressure. Qi Beizong was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, "But there is no other way. The first batch of people of the Snowdance Corps is ready. As for the second batch, we will put them in the front line of East Island first. This is the greatest support I can give them." He paused and suddenly looked at Qin Weibai on the opposite side. He smiled and said very kindly, "Boss Qin, what do you think?" Although Qin Weibai was extremely young, she was one of the important planners of this matter. She appeared here on behalf of Samsara Palace. This identity was enough to make her confident to face Qi Beizong, the #1 person in the military of Zhongzhou State. "Don't worry about East Island." Qin Weibai sat opposite Qi Beizong. She was wearing a white shirt and black tights. She sat there casually, but she was like a scenery that people would willingly sink into. She paused and continued to say with a smile, "As long as the second batch of people of the Snowdance Corps can arrive in East Island on time, there will be no big problem in East Island." Qi Beizong took a deep look at Qin Weibai and said meaningfully, "Boss Qin, does Palace Master have any arrangement?" He dared not look down on Samsara and Qin Weibai more and more. Qin Weibai smiled. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Qi Beizong looked at Yi Dongxing on the side, intentionally or unintentionally. The high-level officials of Zhongzhou State had doubts about the cooperation between Samsara and Zhongzhou State this time. After all, if this plan succeeded, all the groups in Zhongzhou State would gain a lot. In contrast, Samsara's gain was not enough. Moreover, once Zhongzhou State controlled the special warfare situation of several nearby countries, its dependence on Samsara would be greatly reduced. In this way, Samsara Palace seemed to be at a disadvantage. But Samsara Palace was the first force to put forward this plan. All their goals were now hidden behind them. Even Qi Beizong, an old fox, didn't dare to have the slightest carelessness in the face of the devastatingly beautiful Qin Weibai. Yi Dongxing seemed to notice Qi Beizong's gaze. After thinking about it, he finally nodded slightly. Qi Beizong took a deep breath and said calmly, "Then it's decided. The candidates of the three parties remain unchanged. Tribulation will lead the team to East Island. After I return to Yuzhou, I will apply for a plenary meeting of the decision-making committee to decide the number and strength of the second group of people." Everyone nodded at the same time. Opposite Qi Baitsong, Qin Weibai sipped water, her eyes calm and deep. Perhaps among all the people present, she was the only one who knew that there was no possibility of failure in the scheme that involved the whole nation of Zhongzhou State this time. But the final success might not be what some people in Zhongzhou State imagined. Some grudges would eventually be revealed, and some people would eventually appear. She had created a great opportunity in the dark world. It was a godsend. If she didn't seize it, she would be struck by lightning. Qin Weibai drank water silently. He observed the faces in the conference room without batting an eyelid. The result of this plan might not be what Zhongzhou State wanted. But for her, it didn't matter at all. As long as the final result was what she wanted, it would be okay. The power of the whole country, the plan to overthrow a country. Qin Weibai smiled. In recent years, Zhongzhou State had been under more and more pressure in the dark world. The cooperation between Samsara and Zhongzhou State was also pleasant. But did these old people at the top of Zhongzhou State really think that Samsara Palace was a living lay phone? She thoroughly adjusted her work and rest schedule. The next chapter would be a little later. She would start to make up for the chapters she owed after adjusting the time. It wouldn't take too long. Today was enough. Announce this reader group, 670548567 every day. I will update it in the reader group in advance. Welcome to join. Chapter 134. A 6,000-word chapter. This chapter is yesterday's. There are 2 chapters left today. My time is back. Walking out of the training ground, on the way to the assembly, Li Tianlan finally knew the top-secret operation that had been operating in secret for a month. The power of the whole country, the plan to overturn the country. In a month, the Snowdance Corps was established and included all the elite institutions in Zhongzhou State. East, West, and down to North America. They were just the first batch of elites of the Snowdance Corps. No one knew how many people there would be later. But if the goal of the whole country could not be achieved, Zhongzhou State would certainly not give up. How many elites would be involved in the end of this operation? How many thundershocking realm experts? How many invincible realm experts? Zhongzhou State, East Island, North America, and Western Europe. The turbulent general trend formed by the 4 battlefields was about to sweep the entire dark world. For the first time, Li Tianlan felt that kind of surging and heavy power. Someone was building momentum in the dark, and someone was brewing in the dark. When the general trend was about to rise and the wind and clouds were surging, both the ice-condensing realm elites and the invincible realm experts were part of the rumbling general trend. They had no choice but to move forward. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. His battlefield was in East Island, which could be said to be the most critical place in the whole operation. Gu Qianchuan attacked the forces of Fantasy World in Western Europe. Situ Zhangyue attacked the forces of Knights Templars in North America. Instead of attacking their headquarters, they attacked their important branches. Such a move might eventually arouse the cooperation of Fantasy World and Knights Templars. But at least in the beginning, the 2 superpowers would acquiesce to Gu Qianchuan and Situ Zhangyue's behavior of helping them eliminate dissidents. When the 2 superpowers joined forces, it might be the end of the operation. But East Island was different. Gu Qianchuan targeted the dark forces of North America in Western Europe, and Situ Zhangyue attacked the forces of Western Europe in North America. There was a lot of room for maneuver. In the trip to East Island, they were under high pressure from East Island from the very beginning. They were the enemies of the entire East Island. Do we have a chance of winning? Li Tianlan thought for a long time, and then asked calmly. 70%. Horsewoman no longer called Li Tianlan young master, but before she walked, she instinctively stayed half a step behind him, and her tone was calm and respectful. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "How many people do we have in East Island? 1,000? 2,000? In the end, even if the number increased to 10,000 or 100,000, they might still be no match for East Island, right? How far do we have to go to win? That's not how it works." Horsewoman's tone was soft as she said with a smile, "This is not a large-scale open war. The war in the dark world is about infiltration and concealment. Our trip this time means that we're the enemy of the entire East Island, but it doesn't count. She paused and seemed to think about it carefully. Then she continued, take our samsara for example. If the samsara goes east and points directly at Kunlun City, even if Zhongzhou State gives Kunlun City support, it will be in secret. The Dark World knows that Zhongzhou State has Kunlun City and Sai City, but Zhongzhou State doesn't admit it. They only admit that the god of war of Zhongzhou State is Gu Xingyun. On the surface, Kunlun City has little to do with Zhongzhou State. This is the concealment of the special warfare system. So, Li Dunlan lit a cigarette and raised his tone slightly. So since they can't admit it, then when the samsara points directly at Kunlun City, Zhongzhou State can't speak for Kunlun City openly. They can send masters to target samsara, but all the rules are the rules of the Dark World. Once they cross the line, it will be a real war. Thousands of us are no match for East Island, but with the current national strength of Zhongzhou State, it won't even take a month to destroy East Island. East Island doesn't dare to gamble. Li Tianlan nodded. It was not difficult for him to understand what Horsewoman meant. There were basically no rules in the Dark World, but once the rules were established, breaking them would have to bear countless serious consequences. Kunlun City belonged to Zhongzhou State, but it was not in the official voice of Zhongzhou State. Of course, Zhongzhou State would not do this for no reason. The Dark World could be said to be a general term for all kinds of shady people and forces. In recent years, Kunlun City had done countless things for Zhongzhou State, which made many countries gnash their teeth in anger. But on the surface, Zhongzhou State and Kunlun City had nothing to do with each other. They found trouble with Kunlun City, but they couldn't find Zhongzhou State. This was a conflict in the Dark World. But once Zhongzhou State used its official and visible power to help Kunlun City, the relationship between the two would be confirmed. At that time, perhaps many people would come to Zhongzhou State with old scores to ask for an explanation. The so-called real war might start because of this. The special warfare system of East Island was the same. Night Spirit was a force that they had raised outside many years ago. Now the Snowdance Corps wanted to take the foundation of Night Spirit in East Island. Even if East Island didn't agree, it couldn't do anything on the surface. Because this was a matter between the Snowdance Corps and Night Spirit. East Island would secretly send experts to compete with the Snowdance Corps, but on the surface, it could only pretend that it didn't know anything. Once East Island got involved with Night Spirit, the Snowdance Corps would also get involved with Zhongzhou State. East Island couldn't afford the consequences. So on this trip to East Island, their opponents were not East Island, but countless experts of the special warfare system of East Island. This might sound no different, but in fact, the difference was like heaven and earth. Samsara Palace, Kunlun City, Sai City, Snowdance Corps, Knights Templars, Fantasy World. This is just the beginning. As the situation changes, I don't know how many forces will get involved in the future. Horsewoman, do you think I should graduate from the Sky Academy when I come back? Li Tianlan sighed softly and said self-mockingly, I haven't had classes for a few days. Horsewoman said with a smile, we're just going to open up the situation this time. When the time is right, someone will show up. Her words were vague, but Li Tianlan didn't ask more. As one of the 12 super masters of Samsara Palace, Horsewoman might know a lot. Or she might know very little. Li Tianlan didn't know anything at the moment, but there were some questions that he didn't need to ask too clearly. This was a competition between the superpowers in the Dark World. But for him, it was also a competition between the young generation of Zhongzhou State. What he wanted to do was not to participate in those tricks in the general trend of the competition. Under the general trend, he should be willing to stay dormant and go against the current. That was what he should do. I'm willing to be a chess piece. I don't want to jump out of the chessboard, I just want to move forward. On the way to the gathering place, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Horsewoman smiled slightly and said nothing. When the two of them arrived at the gathering place, the 50 elites of the Sky Academy who participated in the special training had stood in a neat line. In front of the line was a high platform. Under the high platform was a shelf with dozens of wine bowls on it. But the high platform was empty under the light. For the time being, no high-level personnel had appeared. That's my place. Horsewoman pointed to the high platform and said in stiff Chinese, I'm going. Li Tianlan nodded slightly. Come on here. At the back of the line, Li Baitian's tall and thin figure appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. He waved his hand vigorously with a bright smile and a smug look on his face. Li Tianlan turned his eyes and saw Li Baitin. He also saw Ning Qianqing, Yi Huayu, Yu Qingyan, and Su Chu, who stood at the back of these people but attracted more attention than anyone else. He hadn't seen them for more than a month. Everyone seemed to have not changed, but their auras were much stronger. Li Tianlan felt a little warm in his heart and quickly walked over. Originally, he wanted to bypass the crowd. But seeing him coming over, the two students in the front of the line hesitated and took the initiative to make way for him. Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. The next second, the line was completely separated and everyone made way for him. Li Tianlan passed through the crowd with a stunned look and looked at Li Baitin. What's going on? He might have some fame among the freshmen now, but it was not enough to make everyone afraid of him, was it? They are all scared after being beaten by eldest senior brother. Li Baitin smiled and walked over to put his arm around Su Chu's shoulder affectionately. Su Chu was broad and Li Baitin was thin and weak. When the two stood together, it was really funny. Young master. Su Chu saw Li Tianlan's eyes sweep over and called him with a dull look. I have discussed with Baitin. Eldest senior brother will join East Emperor Palace. But now we are not arrogant, so eldest senior brother will follow you to protect your safety. This is also his intention. Ning Qianqing glanced at Li Tianlan and explained. Li Tianlan nodded slightly. Although he was still a little confused about Su Chu, at least it was not a bad thing for this fierce general to join East Emperor Palace. He took the initiative to stretch out his hand and said with a smile, Welcome. Since we are all on the same side, don't call me young master from now on. Just call me by my name. Su Chu shook his head and did not shake hands. Instead, he bowed again and said in a low voice, Young master is young master. Facing this stubborn man, Li Tianlan could not say anything more for a while. He just nodded casually and stood among them without saying anything. Hey, Tianlan, you don't know that eldest senior brother is really fierce in the past month. Basically, no one can resist his punch, whether it is a freshman or a senior. Even Fan How You dare not take his punch head-on. An expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm is fierce and powerful. He can be said to be the top expert in our East Emperor Palace now. Li Baitin stood beside Li Tianlan and smiled. It seemed that he was a fox assuming the majesty of a tiger. What about you? What have you gained in the past month? Li Tianlan stared at the high platform in front of him and asked with a chuckle. We're okay, but Qingyan is the most miserable one. In the past month or so, Director Qin tortured Qingyan so much that Qianqing felt sorry for her. Qianqing said that we should celebrate when we arrive at East Island. Li Baitin laughed strangely. Celebrate? Li Tianlan was confused. When he looked at Yu Qingyan again, he found that this girl with a simple and weak temperament was different from a month ago. She was still herself, but her clear eyes were still clear, and the innocence had been replaced by firmness. Li Tianlan followed her hand and looked over. In his sight, he saw Ning Qianqing and Yu Qingyan holding each other's hands tightly, their fingers interlocked. Li Tianlan looked enlightened and said with a smile, We should indeed congratulate them. We should get drunk. He looked at Ning Qianqing's somewhat unnatural expression and joked, You move fast, boy. It has only been a month. Yu Qingyan's face turned red. She lowered her head and said nothing, but she did not loosen her grip on Ning Qianqing's hand. Ning Qianqing coughed and changed the topic with a serious face. Tianlan, how have you been in the past month? Have you broken through? I've condensed ice. I've gained a lot. Li Tianlan nodded with a smile. Before Ning Qianqing could congratulate him, Li Baitin, who was beside him, began to show off without hesitation. Tianlan, your realm is a little low. I thought you could enter the fire-flaming realm. It seems that a genius like me is really hard to come by. Come on, I'll show you this. As he spoke, he directly reached out his hand. A flame sprang out from his palm. The flame surged and finally condensed into an unusually solid and delicate fire sword in his palm. The scorching and empty sword intent radiated, hollow and sharp, gathering fire into soldiers. This was already a sign of the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianlan's eyes lit up slightly. Li Beidian continued, "So, I should be the second expert in the East Emperor Palace now." The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He reached out and casually covered Li Beidian's palm. The fire sword in Li Beidian's palm was still there, but all the sword intent froze in an instant. The water on Li Tianlan's palm spread down, and the fire in Li Beidian's palm had completely disappeared. "Just be honest and rank third." Li Tianlan chuckled and looked at Li Beidian, who was dumbfounded. He chuckled and said, "The leader is here. Cut the crap." In his sight, a row of figures walked up the high platform one by one. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly. At the very front, a man with an ordinary appearance but extremely spirited eyes was walking at the very front. Beside him, there was a young figure that could topple nations and cities, walking side by side with him, peerless in style. At this moment, she seemed to have become the only person on the high platform. She was cold, yet dazzling. For a moment, everyone was dazzled by her. They even subconsciously ignored the other figures on the high platform. Even the appearance of the foreign woman, Knight, did not cause much discussion and commotion. Only Li Tianlan's eyes remained calm. He took a deep look at the middle-aged man at the forefront and kept his composure. Yi Dongxing. Except for the time at the border, this was the second time he saw the god of army of Zhongzhou State. Zhuang Huayang, Qin Ku, Gu Yunxia, Tribulation, and Thunder God appeared one by one. Li Tianlan even saw Wang Xiaoyao at the end. His eyes slowly turned and finally rested on Qin Weibai, who was walking side by side with Yi Dongxing. His eyes were gentle. The whole line was silent. "Sister-in-law is really too beautiful. Tan, you're such a tragedy." Li Beidian looked at Qin Weibai, shook his head and sighed. He looked distressed. "What kind of woman can interest you in the future? You're starting from a high point." Li Tianlan didn't bother to pay attention to him. He just focused on her on the high platform, who looked like a fairy descending to the world. He had never been so calm. Qin Weibai also looked at him and smiled softly. The moment they looked at each other, it seemed that they were each other's whole world. On and off the platform, the leaders and the students saluted each other. Yi Dongxing, who was at the forefront, glanced around and finally stopped on Li Tianlan. His serious eyes seemed to soften. Zhongzhou State and Samsara conspired against East Island. Samsara asked for too little, so little that all the leaders had some doubts. Some radical leaders even thought it was a conspiracy of Samsara. But Li Tianlan was also on the list of East Island, which made some people suppress their inner doubts. The master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibbing for Li Tianlan and even sacrificed herself with the Wang family of Beihai. Her protection of Li Tianlan was evident. With Li Tianlan, the leaders of Zhongzhou State finally decided to start this action even though they had doubts. But in the following time, Li Tianlan was bound to be the focus of their attention. He glanced at Li Tianlan and coughed softly. Everyone's eyes turned from Qin Weibai and fell on Yi Dongxing. Qin Weibai seemed to realize something amidst countless jealous and fiery gazes. She quietly took a step back, blocking everyone's view of her. Yi Dongxing's warm and soft voice continued to ring on the platform and floated into everyone's ears. "Everyone, this action concerns the overall situation of Zhongzhou State and even the fate of Zhongzhou State. At the airport 3 kilometers behind me, the plane is ready. In 40 minutes, all of you will set off for East Island with your mission. I don't know what you will see and hear next, but I can tell you for sure that this trip is a test for each of you. You will bleed, sacrifice, and be buried in a foreign land. You may encounter all kinds of desperate and dangerous situations. In East Island, you represent Zhongzhou State. Similarly, in East Island, you are the enemies of the whole East Island." He paused and continued, "Comrades of the Border Control Corps and the Eastern Theater of Operations secretly set off a week ago. You will be the last of the first batch. Before you set off, I want to ask you one more thing. Is there anyone who wants to quit this action? Silence. Total silence. Yi Dongxing waited quietly for more than a minute and then continued, "It seems that no one is going to give up this action. You all know what your choice means, so I don't need to say more. Let me tell you one last thing. When you go to East Island, you will be the most elite warriors of Zhongzhou State. East Island is the front line, the battlefield. There are no deserters on the battlefield. You can quit this action now, quit the Sky Academy, quit the special warfare system. But when you go to the battlefield, quitting is tantamount to treason. Do you understand?" "Yes." The 50 students under the platform said in unison. It was not a loud voice, but it was extremely firm and unshakable. Yi Dongxing took a deep breath and suddenly waved his hand. All the wine bowls on the shelf under the platform flew up and accurately floated in front of every student and every high-level official on the platform. Yi Dongxing picked up the wine bowl and smiled. "Drink and sing. I will wait for your triumphant return in Zhongzhou State. Then I will sing a song to celebrate your success." He held the wine bowl and drank up the wine in it. Everyone followed his action and drank up the wine in front of them. "This time, I hope that you will go forward with indomitable will and die a worthy death." Yi Dongxing put down the wine bowl, faced the audience, raised his hand with a solemn face, and made a military salute. The arms on and off the platform all rose up. The atmosphere was solemn and solemn. "Let's go." Yi Dongxing put down his arm and said straightforwardly. There were no heroic words to boost morale. This oath before departure was more like a farewell. Send them to die. Go forward with indomitable will and die a worthy death. This was the cruel and bloody dark world. Elites should die. Warriors should die. The line under the platform walked to the airport in silence. The high-level officials on the platform also stepped down one by one. Tribulation, Thunder God, Qin Xianxia Horsewoman. These were the thunder-shocking realm experts going to East Island. And Qin Weibai stepped down with these experts. The high-level officials who stayed on the platform all looked at Qin Weibai in surprise, but they didn't say anything. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Qin Weibai walked down the steps softly. The line passed in silence. When Qin Weibai walked down the last step, Li Tianlan and other people from East Emperor Palace were about to pass by the platform. Li Tianlan stopped and looked at the peerless beauty in front of him who didn't seem to belong to the mortal world. He chuckled and said, "When did you come back?" "Not long ago." Qin Weibai said softly, and her eyes were deep and sentimental. "You've grown a lot taller." Li Tianlan nodded and said vaguely, "The medicine is very good. But you're still not as handsome as before." Qin Weibai said again. Li Tianlan didn't understand, but he didn't think much about it. Qin Weibai took a step forward, tidied his collar, and said softly, "Be careful. Horsewoman and Flaming Fire will protect you at any time. If you can't do it, you might as well give up the two. Anyway, you have to live." Horsewoman stood beside Qin Weibai, and her expression didn't change at all. Li Tianlan nodded slightly, reached out his hand, and held Qin Weibai's cool little hand. He said, "It's okay. I've received your medicine. Don't worry." Qin Weibai chuckled and suddenly took another step forward. She put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck, and her rosy and delicate little mouth directly pressed on Li Tianlan's. She was delicate, strong, and domineering. What did the opinion of the world have to do with her? Li Tianlan had always been the only person in her world. It was like that in the past, and it would be like that in the future. Everyone was dumbfounded. Li Beidian whistled and shouted with excitement. Ning Qianqing and the others applauded hard, looking very happy. Li Tianlan subconsciously put his arms around Qin Weibai's slender waist and kissed her seriously and carefully. On the high platform, only Wang Xiaoyao looked bitter. It wasn't embarrassment or anger, but a kind of loneliness and loss that came from his bones. Below the stage, the woman who was being hugged and kissed by someone else was someone he really liked and even loved. There was suddenly a trace of tenderness in the iron-blooded atmosphere between heaven and earth. After a long time. After a long time. The kiss, as if there was no one else around, finally ended. Qin Weibai put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck tightly and quietly gasped. "I'll wait for you to come back. There will be a reward then." Li Tianlan patted Qin Weibai's back and said, The procession of students finally passed the high platform. Qin Weibai stood where she was and watched Li Tianlan's disappearing figure. She stood there motionlessly for a long time. Go. Under the high platform, Qin Weibai suddenly said. Horsewoman, who had been standing beside Qin Weibai, responded and was about to leave. "Remember," Qin Weibai's cold voice sounded. "You can die. But nothing can happen to my man." Chapter 135. At 5 o'clock in the morning. Under the dim light, a medium-sized flight from the capital of East Island slowly landed at Huading Lanqiao Airport. The door opened, and a group of 3 people walked down the gangway in silence. Instead of taking the airport bus, they walked to the airport hall 1 kilometer away. The airport was a little dim, and it was cold and deserted. Only the signal lights of various colors were flashing. The 3 of them had no luggage on them. They walked unhurriedly in the airport, and their behavior looked very strange. There's a saying in Zhongzhou State called the dragnet. "Teacher, is this the dragnet in front of us?" 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, surrounded by a man in a kimono, slowly moved forward. The young man on the left looked at the empty and deserted airport in front of him and said in a sarcastic tone. The young man was about 30 years old. He was a little short, but he was extremely handsome. He could even be said to have an evil charm. His carefully trimmed hair was neatly combed, and he was wearing a beige casual outfit. At first glance, he looked like a young man who walked out of a comic book. He was a little sharp, but he exuded an indifference that did not care about anything. "The dragnet?" Before the man in the middle said anything, the young woman on the right said softly with a smile, "Feng, do you think we're walking into a trap now?" "Yes and no." Before the young man called Feng said anything, the man in the middle said first. This was a man in his 40s, with sharp sword intent flying all over his body. He was tall and thin. He was not handsome, but his facial features combined gave people a sense of extreme vicissitudes and indifference, full of charm. He wore a moon-white kimono, with wooden shoes on his feet and a long saber hanging on his waist. He walked steadily and resolutely on the road of the airport, like an ancient East Island samurai. With distant sword intent, he stepped on wooden shoes and walked step by step to the prosperous Huading. He was silent, serious, and paranoid. His voice was a little hoarse, with a very strange softness, soft and warm. "Zhongzhou State is really not a place we should come to, or we shouldn't come here openly. But in the current situation of Zhongzhou State, they can't even take care of themselves. As long as we don't take action, they won't have the guts to deal with us." He stretched out his hand and pointed at the empty airport, saying calmly, "This is Zhongzhou State. There seems to be nothing here, but now our every move is under the watch of others. So, Feng Shueji, watch your mouths. The trip to Zhongzhou State is just to watch the show. After the result comes out, we can plan other things." The young man named Feng responded lazily. However, the woman called Shueji bowed slightly and agreed with a respectful expression. Shueji was probably in her early 30s, but she looked younger. Her skin was as white as snow, her long hair was like clouds, and her curvaceous figure was extremely attractive. The temperature in Huading in June could already be considered hot. She wore a light gray professional skirt, black stockings, and high heels, which vividly displayed her well-proportioned figure that was neither fat nor thin. She looked like a mature, elegant, and opinionated urban white-collar worker, but her every move carried a kind of resignation and charm, overflowing amorous, delicate, and extremely enchanting. Coquettish. This was the first impression she gave people. She was simply the kind of woman who was coquettish to the bone, but her every word and every move revealed an indescribable cleverness and dignity. It was really a great enjoyment to press such a woman under one's body and ravage her. In East Island, where the spirit of martial arts flourished for a long time, it was easy to find a thundershocking realm expert and a beautiful woman, but a beautiful thundershocking realm expert was extremely rare. Moreover, a thunder-shocking realm expert who was beautiful, charming, and could serve a man comfortably in bed was even rarer. Xuejie was undoubtedly one of the best among them. Feng glanced at Xuejie calmly, quietly hiding the desire and passion deep in his eyes. She was the teacher's favorite concubine. He didn't know if he could make a great contribution and let the teacher reward him with a night of tasting her. He swallowed his saliva and suppressed his inner thoughts. He whispered in the weird East Island language that sounded wretched and obscene, "Teacher, the master of Samsara Palace is going to fight with the god of war of Zhongzhou State. What do you think of this battle?" The man in the kimono glanced at him and pondered for a while. Then he said calmly, "No matter who wins or loses, it will benefit East Island." Feng was stunned. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. How could he not know this? The two invincible realm experts of East Island entered Zhongzhou State in order to take action as soon as the result of this battle was out. They seemed to have only 3 people, but over the past month, more than 4 figures of the elites of the special warfare system of East Island had secretly sneaked into Zhongzhou State, and this was just one of them. Now everyone was secretly waiting for the moment when the outcome in life and death were decided. By then, no matter who won or lost, Zhongzhou State would fall into chaos, big or small. But Feng didn't want to think about these entanglements of interests. He just wanted to listen to the teacher's analysis of martial arts about who was stronger between the master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Zhongzhou State. "I've seen Tianxin, and I also know her strength." The man in the kimono seemed to know what Feng was thinking, and he continued, "With her strength, she was killed with one strike even with blue sky underworld in her hand. The strength of the master of Samsara Palace is definitely not weaker than the top 5 on the divine list. But this person rarely fights, and we have too little information to analyze. In this battle, even if the master of Samsara Palace dies, Gu Xingyun won't have a good time. Not to mention being seriously injured. Whether he can stay in the invincible realm in the future or even touch martial arts again is a problem. So whether we win or lose this trip, we will benefit, whether it's Zhongzhou State or Samsara Palace. From this point of view, I really hope that the god of war of Zhongzhou State is defeated. After all, death and disability are different. The former has no more variables, but the latter, as long as he doesn't die, it's hard to feel at ease. I really hope that the master of Samsara Palace dies." Feng smiled evilly. His pupils became abnormally dark in the twinkling, which also made him look evil and weird. The man in the kimono raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, "Gu Xingyun's death is in our best interest. Not only the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, but even our territory." He stopped talking, and his eyes became a little gloomy. Territory. For hundreds of years, this had been a scar in the hearts of East Islanders. East Island was composed of 3 big islands and more than 7,000 small islands, covering an area of 300,000 square kilometers. But East Island was not like this hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years ago, East Island was composed of 4 big islands, and one of them was North Island. Today, North Island had long disappeared in the memory of people all over the world. Maybe only East Islanders still remembered it. There was no such thing as North Island in the world. North Island, which used to belong to East Island, now belonged to Zhongzhou State. Beihai Province, which belonged to Zhongzhou State. With Fuxing City as the center, Beihai Province was divided into North Beihai and South Beihai. The north and the south were separated by a shallow sea of dozens of kilometers. Today, North Beihai, which was more than 70,000 square kilometers and occupied half of Beihai Province, was North Island, which used to belong to East Island. East Island had lent North Island to the Wang family of Beihai for 300 years in the name of lease. The original term had long passed. For many years, generations of East Islanders had never given up the idea of taking back North Island. But what they got in return was humiliation again and again. This was the history of blood and tears of the whole East Island. Now, the master of Samsara Palace challenged the god of war of Zhongzhou State, which was another opportunity for East Island. Once both sides suffered losses, the superpower of the special warfare system of Xianxia state would fall into an unprecedented state of emptiness. Even if Wang Tianzong had the title of first on the divine list, he couldn't control the whole dark world. The Wang family of Beihai couldn't lose the foundation of Xianxia state, so they had to give up North Beihai reluctantly. This could be said to be the best opportunity for East Island now. Two invincible realm superiors entered the game in person, and countless superiors secretly lurked in Xianxia state. Such a big gamble, what they wanted, and what they wanted at all costs. On June 15th, the god of war of Xianxia state was defeated and killed. This was what the whole East Island hoped to see. I know what teacher's goal is, but I have no ambition, and I don't want to think about things that are too noble. I only ask one thing, teacher. Feng licked his lips, and the evil and greed in his eyes were almost undisguised. Say it. The man in the kimono thought of something and said flatly. I've long heard that Qin Weibai, the number 2 figure of Samsara Palace, is an outstanding beauty and the first beauty in the dark world. If the master of Samsara Palace dies, I only hope that teacher can let me enjoy Qin Weibai for one night. One night is enough. I will definitely serve teacher and Wuji Palace with my life from now on. Feng's eyes were extremely hot. He had never seen Qin Weibai, but he had already outlined a clear and cold image in his mind. She was high above, perfect, holy, and unparalleled, like a fairy, like a goddess. One night was really enough. I don't know how the first beauty in the dark world compares with those actresses in East Island. I really want to smack. Before Feng finished his words, the man in the kimono had already stretched out his hand and slapped him hard in the face. Feng covered his face and looked at the teacher in astonishment. Then he quickly lowered his head. At that moment, he could clearly see the coldness and rage in the eyes of the teacher who gave him everything today. That was the most naked killing intent. You're a pile of shit. Do you think you can compare with the moon? That's blasphemy. The man in the kimono narrowed his eyes tightly, and there was undisguised anger in his eyes. The sharp sword intent whistled around his body. The sword intent swept over Feng's face and suddenly left a bloody mark on his face. Yes. Feng bowed deeply and said respectfully, "You're obsessed with women all day long. What can you achieve in your life? You've disgraced Wuji Palace." The man in the kimono flicked his wide kimono sleeves and walked straight forward on his wooden shoes. Wuji Palace, Liuhua Hall, Jifeng Sword Training School. These were the 3 holy lands of martial arts in East Island, and also the forces owned by the 3 superiors of the Invincible Realm. The Divine Wind Force formed by the 3 holy lands was the power center of the special warfare system of East Island. Its status was no different from that of Kunlun City in Xianxia State, and even more important. Night Spirit was outside, and Divine Wind was inside. In the past countless years, this was the situation of the special warfare system of East Island. Now that Night Spirit was destroyed, the status of the Divine Wind Force and the 3 holy lands became more important. Today, among the 3 holy lands of martial arts in East Island, Wuji Palace was the well-deserved number 1 in terms of power and influence. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, was known as the first superior of East Island and ranked 8th on the divine list. In the current ranking of the divine list, his position could be said to be right behind the master of Samsara Palace. Tianhai Wuji was originally born in Jifeng Sword Training School, the number 1 sword school in East Island, but he became the biggest trader of Jifeng Sword Training School. More than 10 years ago, Tianhai Wuji was just 30 years old and had already entered the thunder-shocking realm. Moreover, he was internally selected as the next sect master of Jifeng Sword Training School. But all of a sudden, he made a lot of remarks that disapproved of Jifeng Sword Principle. In the martial arts world of East Island, such remarks were simply shocking. The elders of Jifeng Sword Training School were furious and expelled Tianhai Wuji from Jifeng Sword Training School. Tianhai Wuji left alone. 4 years later, he broke through the Invincible Realm, established Wuji Palace, and created his own Wuji Way. In order to completely abandon his past, Tianhai Wuji changed his sword to saber. In the entire dark world, He could be said to be the only Grandmaster of Sword Principle who used sabers. Wuji Palace was established. Coincidentally, Jifeng Sword Training School in East Island suffered from internal strife a few years ago and never recovered. In order to protect themselves in the chaos, countless people of Jifeng Sword Training School announced that they gave up Jifeng Sword Principle and acknowledged the Wuji Way, so they joined Wuji Palace. Wuji Palace, which had been established for a short time, soared up and now became the most famous holy land of martial arts in East Island. Wind was Tianhai Wuji's proudest student. And Snow Girl was Tianhai Wuji's favorite pet in bed, or even a slave. In addition, Wuji Palace also had left and right visiting professors and 4 protectors. In a small place like East Island, such a force could be said to be extremely powerful. This was also one of the reasons why Tianhai Wuji dared to come to Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State was about to be in chaos, and the power of Wuji Palace was enough to ensure his safety in Zhongzhou State. They were gradually approaching the airport lobby. Tianhai Wuji walked with wooden shoes, his face expressionless. Wind, who had been slapped, wiped the blood on his face and followed Tianhai Wuji. Addicted to women? He narrowed his eyes mocking. What a ridiculous excuse. This excuse was so clumsy, but the meaning was extremely obvious. Tianhai Wuji was telling him clearly that even if the master of Samsara Palace died, his idea of having Qin Weibai for one night was also illusory. Wind gently gritted his teeth and said nothing. Tianhai Wuji slightly narrowed his eyes, as if he knew everything behind him like the palm of his hand. He could not agree to Wind's request. His student had never seen Qin Weibai, but as the palace master of Wuji Palace, he had seen her once. He dreamed of it, tossing and turning. They walked into the airport lobby and walked to the arrival gate. Tianhai Wuji and the other 2 finally saw the people who would pick them up. Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, who had just sent the 50 freshmen away, was waiting at the arrival gate. Standing beside him were Qin Ku, the deputy director of the teaching office of the Sky Academy, and Chao Huazhang, the head of the tactical staff department. There were 3 people on both sides, and they gradually approached each other. Zhuang Huayang did not sleep all night, but there was no fatigue in his eyes. Looking at the East Island Grandmaster in a kimono with a long saber on his waist, he took the initiative to reach out his hand and said with a smile, "Hello, Tianhai Palace Master, I'm Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy." Tianhai Wuji shook hands with Zhuang Huayang and said with a smile, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Headmaster Zhuang, I have a Zhongzhou name. My name is Yi Wuji." He bowed deeply to Zhuang Huayang, and his etiquette was meticulous. He said softly, "Please give me your advice." "Yi Wuji?" Zhuang Huayang was stunned, and then said with a hypocritical smile, "Hello, Palace Master Yi. I hope we can learn from each other and communicate with each other." Yi Wuji straightened up, nodded casually, looked at Wind beside him and said, "He is Wind. Well, Lifeng, how about this name?" Wind said nothing, glanced at the cold and elegant Qin Ku obscurely, and then bowed deeply to Zhuang Huayang. Yi Wuji introduced Snow Girl again. After the introduction of both sides, he said with a smile, "Headmaster Zhuang, can we go now?" Zhuang Huayang hesitated a little, and then said softly with a smile, "Palace Master Yi, I'm afraid we have to wait. Well, another distinguished guest from East Island is coming soon. How about we go together?" Another distinguished guest? Yi Wuji's eyes narrowed slightly. At this time, he knew who the other distinguished guest from East Island that Zhuang Huayang mentioned was without thinking. Jifeng Sword Sage, Wuxia and Xianxia, the leader of Jifeng Sword Training School. Both of them were great grandmasters of East Island, but when Yi Wuji set off from East Island, Wuxia and Xianxia was in Northern Europe. He didn't expect that they would arrive together. He nodded calmly and said in a gentle tone, "Of course, the guest should follow the host's wishes." "Thank you for your understanding, Palace Master." Zhuang Huayang stood beside Yi Wuji with a smile on his face, waiting quietly. In his line of sight, a black shadow lightly floated over. Like a cold wind, it looked slow, but inside, it was fast and fierce. Zhuang Huayang subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Although he had seen the photos countless times, it was the first time for Zhuang Huayang to see the sword sage of East Island with his own eyes. Lu Xianxia looked less than 40 years old. He had long hair, which was tied up high, and wore a loose black robe. He was handsome and aloof, with a long sword hanging on his waist and a green jade flute of good quality in his hand. He walked slowly. In an instant, it seemed that there was only loneliness and desolation left in the world. There was a gust of wind moving forward. The stronger the wind, the stronger the sword intent. The lonely and desolated sword intent spread with the wind, and the whole airport hall seemed to be turned into a field. Lu Xianxia's pace was neither fast nor slow, but every step seemed to step on people's hearts. The color of the jade flute was soft. Lu Xianxia's long hair, which was tied up high, swayed gently. Behind the endless lonely sword intent, there was a demeanor that made everyone sad and confused. It was his own story. The long road was long, and only the sword was his companion. Zhuang Huayang sighed softly and subconsciously looked at Yi Wuji beside him. More than 10 years ago, from the moment this kendo grandmaster who used sabers became the biggest trader of Jifeng sword training school of East Island, the once supreme kendo school in East Island seemed to have begun to decline. In the year when Yi Wuji was about to break through the invincible realm, the special warfare system of East Island was in chaos. Lu Xianxia's master, the old sword sage of East Island, Songxia Tai, was seriously injured and dying. After Yi Wuji, the first senior brother, left Jifeng sword training school, there was only Lu Xianxia and another young man to support the overall situation in the young generation. The young man from East Island had no name, and his code name was Broken Sword. Tianhai Wuji, Broken Sword, and Lu Xianxia. They used to be the three most outstanding disciples of Jifeng Kendo of Jifeng sword training school, and they all had invincible talent. But when everyone thought that Jifeng sword training school was about to usher in its peak, the three disciples completely parted ways. Tianhai Wuji became a trader, and Broken Sword became the biggest trader in East Island in decades. When the special warfare system of East Island was in chaos, at the most critical moment, Broken Sword killed his master with a sword, and made the illusion that he was dead, and put all the blame on Lu Xianxia. Lu Xianxia, who had just entered the thunder-shocking realm, was almost deserted in the blink of an eye. He escaped from East Island and searched for the truth alone while being chased by countless elite masters of East Island. Jifeng sword training school fell apart. In the same year, Tianhai Wuji broke through the fulfillment of the thunder-shocking realm and went straight to the invincible realm. From the thunder-shocking realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and then to the fulfillment of the thunder-shocking realm. Then he entered the invincible realm. When Jifeng sword training school almost disappeared, Lu Xianxia returned to East Island and reformed Jifeng sword training school with the strength of the invincible realm. The death of the old sword sage was intentionally or unintentionally forgotten by all parties in East Island. Lu Xianxia's position became more and more stable. A few years ago, he was invited to the imperial palace by the Mikado of East Island and became the crown prince's kendo teacher. After that, Jifeng sword training school stabilized again. The broken sword disappeared without a trace. But between Tianhai Wuji and Lu Xianxia, they completely inherited the feud between Jifeng sword training school and Wuji Palace. The deviation of the understanding of martial arts between the two brothers, Tianhai Wuji stood by and did nothing when the old sword sage died, and he even took advantage of the situation, all became the knot in their hearts that could not be untied. Liuhua Palace in East Island was the most traditional and ancient ninja force, and it had always been neutral. And now the new Jifeng sword training school became the most important chess piece for East Island to check and balance Wuji Palace. The entanglement between the three holy lands even spread to the Divine Wind Force, the special warfare center of East Island. And there was a remaining night spirit. East Island was not peaceful at the moment. And this time, about 2,000 elites of Zhongzhou state entered East Island one after another. It seemed that they could seize a lot of opportunities in the entanglement of the superpowers. Zhuang Huayang smiled softly. For the plot of Zhongzhou state, the Six and Samsara Palace had fully cooperated. Even if East Island had a plan, the two invincible realm experts had already arrived in Zhongzhou State. It would not be easy for them to go back in a short time. Although the outcome of this battle was still far away, Zhongzhou State had already taken the lead. Next, they could take their time to plot. Zhuang Huayang smiled and took a step forward. Looking at Lu Shengzangquan coming over, he chuckled and said, "Your Excellency Sword Sage, welcome to Zhongzhou State to attend the ceremony. I'm Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy." "Headmaster Zhuang, hello." Lu Shengzangquan's voice was gentle and elegant. With his appearance, his lethality was simply unparalleled. Zhuang Huayang smiled and introduced calmly, "Your Excellency Sword Sage, let me introduce to you His Excellency Tianhai Wuji, the Palace Master of Wuji Palace. Both of you are martial arts grandmasters of East Island, so you should know each other well, right?" Zhuang Huayang's words were really heart-wrenching. Yi Wuji glanced at him, expressionless, and said nothing. Lu Shengzangquan gently squeezed the jade flute in his hand, and his smile became more and more elegant. "Wuji? Hee, I've never heard of it." "You." Lu Feng, who stood beside Yi Wuji, narrowed his eyes and subconsciously took a step forward. Yi Wuji calmly stopped him. But he looked at Zhuang Huayang and said indifferently, "Can we go now?" "Of course." Zhuang Huayang answered with a smile and took the lead to lead the way. The moment Yi Wuji turned around, he glanced at Lu Shengzangquan intentionally or unintentionally. Their eyes were cold, and both of them had killing intent to each other, but there was also a very obscure tacit understanding. "Headmaster Zhuang, I heard that there is an outstanding freshman in your school named Li Tianlon. I wonder if I have the honor to meet him?" Yi Wuji walked beside Zhuang Huayang and suddenly asked with a chuckle. Zhuang Huayang's heart skipped a beat, and he calmly said with a smile, "Li Tianlon? He's a very good freshman, but he hasn't grown up yet. How do you know him, Palace Master?" "I heard it by accident." Yi Wuji chuckled. Zhuang Huayang nodded. He didn't say that he could meet him, but he didn't say that he couldn't. The conversation just now was over. The muscles at the corner of Yi Wuji's mouth twitched, and he narrowed his eyes. "Li Tianlon." This name appeared with Qin Weibai and the Master of Samsara Palace. How could he not know? If the Master of Samsara Palace was defeated this time, he would kill Li Tianlon first. This lowly thing like an ant had desecrated the most holy and flawless moon in his heart. No matter what, he had to die. Yi Wuji took a deep breath, and the killing intent surged in his heart, but his eyes were strangely gentle. Chapter 136. At 8 o'clock in the morning on June 11th. It was raining heavily in Dongdu. The plane landed smoothly on the runway in the heavy rain. Li Tianlon walked out of the cabin and walked along the passage leading to the airport lobby. Looking at the dense raindrops outside the window hitting the ground crazily, his originally calm heart seemed to become a little depressed. The storm was coming? The heavy rain had fallen, as if it was going to overturn the world. The sky outside the window was gloomy. The sky, which was supposed to be full of bright sunshine, was covered with dark clouds and a strange black color. The sun did not rise. In the morning, Dongdu looked like a long night was coming. "This day is really awesome." Li Beidian took Yi Huayu's small hand and put down the phone with the other hand. He said with a headache, "I just checked the weather forecast of Dongdu. There will be heavy rain for the next week. In this damn weather, it's not unusual to encounter tsunamis and earthquakes. I don't want to die in the hands of heavenly calamity without killing a single person. There's nothing more unjust than that." Li Baitian's voice was very low and vague, but some sensitive words still stimulated the nerves of some people. In front of the 6 people from East Emperor Palace, a slim and slender figure of a woman almost instinctively turned around, and her eyes fell on Li Beidian. The woman was extremely beautiful. She had ear-length short hair, which was rare in East Island. She was full of heroic spirit and looked extremely simple and capable. She looked at Li Beidian and narrowed her eyes slightly. She said in a slightly dignified tone, "Who did you just say?" Li Beidian looked confused. His identity was not inferior to that of the woman in front of him, but his strength was low. In the previous month of special training, he was one of the people she paid special attention to. After being abused for a month, even if he had a strong psychological quality, Li Beidian had some psychological shadow. He did not dare to refute anything at the moment. He just said weakly, "I didn't say who." Heavenly calamity? The woman's eyes condensed. When she was serious, her whole person exuded a kind of demonic and dangerous temperament. Her eyes were not sharp, but there was a kind of pervasive femininity in them. She looked gloomy, and she was definitely not a good person. Catastrophe literally meant natural disaster, but in the dark world, it was also a famous code name. He ranked 5th on the killer list in the dark world and was known as the contemporary king of gun. This man was only in the fire-flaming realm, but he was extremely good at hiding and disguising. He was also the leading expert in changing guns in the dark world. He held 2 famous guns. Although they were not murderous weapons, they were very powerful. Under the invincible realm, as long as he kept a distance and aimed at them, any expert in the thunder-shocking realm would be fatally threatened. Now the situation in East Island was treacherous and could break out at any moment. When she suddenly heard the name Heavenly Calamity, she couldn't help but feel nervous. "Teacher Bai, he was talking about the weather." Li Tianlan pointed to the heavy rain outside and said with a chuckle, "He has already associated the heavy rain with tsunamis and earthquakes." Beidian said that he is not afraid of man-made disasters, but natural disasters. Teacher Bai replied with an "oh," and then her beautiful but extremely dangerous eyes glared at him. "What, Teacher Bai? Call me sister or teacher in the future. It sounds awful. Do I look old?" She took a step closer to Li Tianlan and said in a low voice, "If it weren't for you, little bastard, my aunt wouldn't have sent me to the Sky Academy. I hate it most when people call me teacher. You even sprinkle salt on my wound. Do you want to die? Do you want to die?" Li Tianlan touched his nose with a bitter smile and called her sister Bai. The first miss of the Bai family, who was now the group leader of the actual combat lesson of the Sky Academy, was really familiar with him. Since she came to the Sky Academy, Li Tianlan only saw her once when she boarded the plane a few hours ago, and they talked less than 10 words. He really didn't know how this first miss of the Bai family, who looked extremely cold, could be so close to him naturally, but this big sister kept calling him little bastard. Li Tianlan didn't feel disgusted at all. Bai Yuming nodded with satisfaction. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, Li Tianlan asked calmly, "Sister Bai, have you encountered heavenly calamity?" Today, he was no longer the greenhorn at that time. At least he had a general understanding of the dark world. Naturally, he had heard of the famous heavenly calamity. Bai Yoming's delicate face turned slightly cold, and she nodded and said, "That's a freak. 2 years ago, when I led a team to perform a mission in Africa, I met him once. If it weren't for several subordinates who covered me with their lives, I guess I would have died in Africa. Heavenly calamity itself is not too terrible, but with his 2 guns, as long as he keeps a distance, there are basically few people under the invincible realm who can't be killed by him. Modern hot weapons are not a fair thing to martial arts." Li Tianlan nodded, thinking of the sky attack that could probably be returned to him by dark through a special channel. He seemed to be lost in thought. Bai Yuming turned around again and walked forward. They entered Dongdu in the name of a tourist group, using fake identities that were more authentic than their real identities, and the plane was not a private plane. Among the hundreds of passengers, except for the 50 people who came from the Sky Academy and several thunder-shocking realm experts who led the team, the rest were all ordinary tourists. Now it was raining heavily today. Tourists, men and women, were walking in the passage densely. They were really inconspicuous in the crowd. Dongdu was the capital city of East Island, and also the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force, the special warfare center of East Island. Zhongzhou State invested the least personnel in the city, but it was also the most elite force. Tribulation by Yuming, Gu Yunxia, Enchantress, Horsewoman, and Flaming Fire were responsible for the action in Dongdu. Thunder God, Qin Ku, and others were scattered on the other 2 big islands of East Island. The 2,000 elites who sneaked into East Island had been in various places of East Island for a month. With the arrival of the elites from the Sky Academy, there were only 50 people from the Deep Sea Academy left. Before the arrival of the second batch of reinforcements from Zhongzhou State, the elites from the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy, 100 people, were all the combat forces of Zhongzhou State in East Island. Outside the window, the heavy rain fell wildly. Li Tianlan looked out of the window. In the majestic rain, heaven and earth seemed to be red, like blood, mournful and glaring. He turned around indifferently and walked directly into the airport lobby. Although he could not fly, he would fly to the sky. Although there was no sound, the sound would be amazing. East Island was his first battlefield, a big enough stage, a magnificent general trend. On this day, in the downpour of Dongdu, Li Tianlan officially stepped on the stage of the Dark World as a chess piece. Like a soldier crossing the river, he could only move forward. As a special warfare academy with the same specifications as the Sky Academy, the Deep Sea Academy was located in the depths of the West Mountain of Yuzhou. Although there was no surging scene of rivers and seas, the Deep Sea Academy surrounded by mountains also had the magnificence that the Sky Academy did not have. The Deep Sea Academy was roughly the same size as the Sky Academy. Although the dean, General Wang Lin, was not one of the top 10 contemporary experts of Zhongzhou State, he was 10 years younger than Zhuang Huayang. Although he was not famous, the actual combat capability of the two should be about the same. The higher-ups had always attached great importance to the two special warfare academies. From making the list of the higher-ups to choosing the school site, making the curriculum, and even recruiting the students, there were special people in charge of everything. They tried to balance the strength of the two special warfare academies, so that the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State could develop vigorously. The two special warfare academies met once every 3 years. Behind a lot of bloodshed and sacrifice, the talents who came out of them could be called the foundation of a country. With such strength, the importance of balancing each other was self-evident. As for the special and subtle situation of Huading in recent years, it was not the focus of the higher-ups when choosing the distribution of students. Otherwise, many big shots would not let their children and apprentices avoid the list selected by the higher-ups and enter the Sky Academy through the back door. At 8 o'clock in the morning, when it rained heavily in Dongdu, it was also drizzling in Yuzhou City. Surrounded by West Mountain, the Deep Sea Academy was filled with mist. It was ethereal, like a fairyland. Unlike Yi Dongxing in the Sky Academy, before the best 50 elites of the Deep Sea Academy went to battle, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, went on the stage in person and held a speech that was exciting enough to make people's blood boil. After the meeting, he personally sent the 50 elites to the plain. After everything was done, he returned to the temporary resting place arranged for him by the Deep Sea Academy. The resting place was located on the second floor of the residential area. The interior decoration was not luxurious, but it was extremely comfortable. Gu Xingyun, dressed in a military uniform with the red rank of marshal, walked in through the door, put the coat in his hand on the hanger, and walked into the living room calmly. In the living room, a beautiful woman of unknown age sat silently. She wore a light green cheongsam and sat quietly on the sofa. Like an orchid in an empty valley, she had a kind of tranquil and deep indifference. Her long black and beautiful hair, like a waterfall, was draped over her shoulders. She held a cup of tea in her snow-white hand with a green bracelet and said nothing. Gu Xingyun walked to her and sat down, pouring himself a cup of tea. The woman didn't move, as if she was unaware of everything around her. This was a woman who could be said to be devastatingly beautiful from afar. However, when one looked at her up close, although she was still extremely beautiful, her entire person lacked a trace of moving vitality. She was like a vivid and exquisite doll. Beautiful, of course, extremely beautiful, but not a living thing. I heard that you paid attention to several freshmen in the Deep Sea Academy. Today, I deliberately came to have a look. Sure enough, they are all promising talents. Gu Xingyun took a sip of water from the teacup and said with a smile, among the 5 people, 3 are likely to be used by Kunlun City. As for the other 2, one can be said to be on our side. Although his mind is uncertain, I can still grasp him on the whole. As for the other one, you don't have to think about him. You should know from his surname that he is from the Dongqing clan, and we can't win him over." The woman was still silent. That was a kind of numbness, as if she was not interested in anything in the world. In this plot of Zhongzhou State, the East Island part was almost entirely based on the Sky Academy. Not to mention the 50 most elite students, there were several high-level leaders of the Sky Academy among the team leaders. Such a scale might not be regarded as the Sky Academy coming out in full force, but at least it was a big investment. Both emotionally and logically, as the supreme leader of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, Gu Xingyun should go to the Sky Academy and personally send the people of the Sky Academy to battle. But the truth made everyone feel astonished. The one who went to the Sky Academy was another leader of the Special Warfare Group, Qi Baitsong, the standing minister of the army headquarters. But Gu Xingyun himself came to the Deep Sea Academy. Everyone was guessing the profound meaning of Gu Xingyun's move. Some even suspected that Gu Xingyun dared not see the people of Samsara who were in the Sky Academy at this time. But this rumor was strangled as soon as it came out. Such a rumor was really stupid. On June 15th, the Invincible Realm would fight with the Invincible Realm, and it was not a real life-and-death fight. As the war god of Zhongzhou State, how could Gu Xingyun be afraid of a fight? But in this way, everyone was even less clear about the meaning of Gu Xingyun's coming to the Deep Sea Academy. Just to pay attention to the freshman that the woman in front of her paid attention to? Not to mention whether others believed it or not, even the woman herself did not believe it. She did not believe it and did not want to think about it. Kunlun City. It had nothing to do with her. Gu Xingyun. It also had nothing to do with her. Life and death, the general trend, the world of mortals, snow, everything seemed to have nothing to do with her. Gu Xingyun waited for a while. Seeing that the woman did not mean to speak at all, he laughed at himself and said softly, "Li Shi, when this thing is over, I will accompany you to have a look in Zhongzhou State. Haven't you always wanted to go to the Waterfall of Beauties in Beihai Province? How about I go with you?" Waterfall of Beauties. A trace of trance finally appeared in the woman's eyes, which had always been numb, but it flashed away. She shook her head and said in a dead tone, "I've been there. I don't have to see it. It's also good to revisit the old place," Gu Xingyun said with a smile. His tone was elegant and gentle, looking unusually warm. The woman was silent again and did not say a word. A name that sounded extremely sad, a name that even countless people in Zhongzhou State had never heard of. However, this name also represented an extremely illustrious identity. Mrs. Governor of Kunlun City. Mrs. Governor of Kunlun City, whose relationship with Gu Xingyun had been frozen for countless years. Gu Xingyun picked up the teacup to drink water and became silent. The mobile phone vibrated slightly in his pocket. Gu Xingyun put down the teacup and took out his mobile phone to open it. On the screen, a slightly dim but tender photo appeared on the screen. It was a photo of a young man and a woman kissing. The woman's black hair was flying, and she was extremely beautiful. The man was dressed in camouflage clothes. He looked ordinary, but he kissed attentively and affectionately. Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun held the mobile phone steadily and stared at the photo on the screen for a long time. He did not even move his body. Such an unrestrained picture appeared on Qin Weibai, a core high-level member of Samsara. What did this mean? He narrowed his eyes slightly, put the mobile phone in front of Li Shi, and said with a chuckle, "How about this young man? He has wind and thunder veins, and his future achievements are limitless. When he enters the invincible realm and grows for a few years, even I can't suppress him." Li Shi's eyes were empty, and she was silent. No one knew if she looked at the photo again. Gu Xingyun took back the mobile phone and was silent for a while. Then he suddenly said, "What do you think of Qingqing?" Li Shi's dead body suddenly trembled. She slowly turned around and stared at Gu Xingyun. Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City, was not her child. But Gu Qingqing, the little princess of Kunlun City, was her and Gu Xingyun's daughter. She was only 17 years old this year. "I'm afraid Yulan can't handle him." Gu Xingyun pointed to Li Tianlan in the photo and said with a smile, "What do you think of Qingqing?" Swish. She suddenly raised her hand. The teacup in her hand was suddenly raised, and the whole cup of tea was poured on Gu Xingyun's face without reservation. But she threw the teacup in her hand on the tea table with no expression. She slowly got up and said with a scornful look, "Shameless." She turned around and left the living room directly without stopping. The god of war of Zhongzhou State, whose face was splashed with tea, sat motionless on the sofa. After a while, he wiped the tea on his face carefully and seriously. The tea was cold with the tea leaves. It was like a heart that had been sealed for nearly 20 years. P.S. Chapter 137. Azure Pool was located on the bank of Lake Luji in the suburbs of Dongdu. It was a medium-sized hot spring club. The internal garden structure imitated the ancient architecture of Dongdu, which was very unique and full of charm. It was one of the most famous hot spring sightseeing areas in the whole East Island. Around Lake Luji, there were countless hot spring clubs of all sizes. Azure Pool came late, and the boss was a foreigner from Gaoshan State, so it had been excluded from the beginning. In the past 10 years, the club had been moved 3 times in a row, and each time it moved, it was more and more remote than the last, which invisibly led to the reputation of Azure Pool becoming more and more miserable. Every day, business was bleak, and it even fell to the point where it could barely operate. However, such a remote location was not without its benefits. Although very few serious businessmen were willing to accept such benefits, it was a reality. Azure Pool was located on the bank of a lake, backed by a high mountain, with steep terrain and dense jungle. It was a place that was extremely difficult to be surrounded, and it was very suitable for breaking out. For some people with ulterior motives, it was simply the best place to hide. It was remote and low-key. Even if they were exposed, they had a considerable possibility of escaping unscathed with the terrain. This was the place where Li Tianlan and others stayed. There were more than 50 people, and they were divided into 5 batches. When it was nearly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, all of them safely entered the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club. Li Tianlan's East Emperor Palace was the last batch, led by Yuming herself. There were 7 people from East Emperor Palace now. 6 of them came to East Island, but only Ning Qianxing knew Japanese, and he was not very proficient in it. When he translated the name of the club with a strange look, the bumpkin Li Tianlan didn't think much of it, but Li Baitian's face turned red. Azure Pool? How brave a weirdo must be to come up with such a name. He suppressed his desire to complain and walked into the club. The boss, who had arranged other people, walked out with a smile on his face. He held an umbrella in one hand and walked face to face with them in the heavy rain. The boss looked about 50 years old. He was slightly bald and fat. He was wearing sportswear and had a smile on his face. He looked exactly like a standard businessman who made money. But Li Tianlan and others didn't dare to look down on this fat middle-aged man. Because the small amount of information that Tribulation had personally sent them on the plane clearly mentioned the true identity of the owner of the Hot Spring Club. Han Shishuan, a businessman from Gaoshan State, came from Zhongzhou State and had a small family fortune. He immigrated to Gaoshan State 20 years ago. He was easygoing and extremely luxurious. He was a prodigal who had reached a certain level of squandering. In less than 2 years in Gaoshan State, he had squandered his family business. After that, he made a living in Gaoshan State, opened a restaurant, started a company, ran a bar, played esports, and even owned a very small entertainment company. This big prodigal had countless ways to make money, but in the end, miraculously, none of them really made him rich. In a few years, he almost traveled to all the big cities in Gaoshan State and lost money in everything he did. In the end, 10 years ago, because he owed a huge debt in Gaoshan State, he snuck into East Island when he was about to be sued. He opened a hot spring club with what little money he had left, changed his name, and barely settled down with the net profit of a few million a year. But all this was Han Shishuan's superficial identity. In fact, if he hadn't read the information in advance, Li Tianlan would never have believed that this seemingly ordinary greasy uncle turned out to be a real expert of the thunder-shocking realm. He now had the nationality of Gaoshan State, but his actual identity was a senior agent belonging to the 2nd Department of the General Staff Headquarters of Zhongzhou State. He was the deputy director of the 9th Bureau of the 2nd Department of the General Staff Headquarters. In terms of military rank, he was a veritable senior colonel. The 2nd Department of the General Staff Headquarters was the famous Military Intelligence Department of Zhongzhou State. Its internal structure was extremely complicated. The functions of the 16 bureaus overlapped with each other, but each had its own duties. The 9th Bureau belonged to the External Action Bureau, which collected intelligence of various countries in Asia. At certain times, it even carried out some assassination missions. Countries such as Gaoshan, East Island, Heng State, and Annan State were all within the scope of activities of the 9th Bureau. Han Shixuan was one of the 6 deputy directors of the 9th Bureau of the 2nd Department, and he was the most senior deputy director. Now he was in East Island. All the intelligence of Zhongzhou State in East Island was first collected by him, and then transmitted to Zhongzhou State. To put it bluntly, Han Shixuan was the intelligence leader of Zhongzhou State in East Island. Such a position might not be extremely powerful, but it was extremely sensitive, and only those who were very loyal could bear the responsibility. Han Shixuan could stay in East Island for 10 years, which showed that Zhongzhou State valued and trusted him. "Hello, Chief." Looking at the boss coming over, Bai Yuming held the umbrella in one hand and directly raised her arm to give a military salute with the other hand. Han Shixuan had the military rank of senior colonel, and the most important goal of Zhongzhou State's scheme this time was to plot against East Island. Han Shixuan's position was more important than before, and it was certain that he would be conferred the rank of Major General in the near future. Before Bai Yuming came to the Sky Academy, she was a deputy brigade officer of the Border Control Corps. Although the military rank of the officers of the Border Control Corps was generally one level higher than that of the officers of the 4 theaters of operations, the deputy brigade officer was just a colonel, which was one level lower than Han Shixuan's current military rank, so it was completely reasonable for her to salute. Li Tianlan and the others also raised their hands instinctively and gave a solemn salute. The chubby Han Shixuan was startled, but he didn't return the salute. Instead, he grabbed Bai Yuming's raised arm and said helplessly, "Don't pay attention to this in East Island. There's no benefit. You're the guests and I'm the boss. It's as simple as that." Bai Yuming simply nodded and didn't say much. Han Shixuan rolled his eyes and suddenly said, "Which one of you is Li Tianlan?" Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. He looked at Han Shixuan and said casually, "I am." Before Han Shixuan's eyes fell on Li Tianlan, Bai Yuming had already taken a step forward calmly and said softly, "Tianlan is my sworn brother." "Chief, how do you know him?" Han Shixuan was deeply surprised that Bai Yuming was so nervous, but he didn't think much about it. People like them, who had been sent out by the Military Intelligence Department all year round, basically had no position. The General Staff Headquarters of Zhongzhou State had always been considered the sphere of influence of the Southeast Group. The Chief of General Staff and the Minister of the Second Ministry could also be said to be the capable generals of the Southeast Group. But even so, the Southeast Group didn't dare to say that it controlled the Military Intelligence Department. People like Han Shixuan didn't have the concept of the 6 groups in their hearts. Zhongzhou State was their mission, honor, and even soul. "I talked to Headmaster Zhuang before I came here," Han Shixuan said with a smile. "The headmaster told me about this young heavenly son who is gradually becoming famous among the young generation of Zhongzhou State. Now there are 2 wind and thunder veins and 1 heavenly king heart in Zhongzhou State, and they are all in East Island. I must protect such people without the headmaster's order. In the future, when Zhongzhou State expands its territory, we will rely on heavenly sons like you." This was a great compliment. Heavenly sons and young heavenly sons were previously used to describe Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. Now Han Shixuan added such a title to Li Tianlan, which showed how much this uncle who was devoted to the country looked forward to him. "Chief, you are too serious." Li Tianlan took a step forward and said calmly. Han Shixuan took a deep look at Li Tianlan and smiled without saying anything. Yes, Tianlan's realm is still low, and he still needs time to grow. By Yuming echoed. Han Shixuan's words might not be malicious, but it might not sound like this when it was spread to the outside world. Behind the word kill by overpraise, there were too many bloody tragedies. Bai Yuming did not want Li Tianlan to wear the hat of young heavenly son when his realm was still low. Zhongzhou state is the world's #1 power, and it can afford some time. Han Shixuan patted Li Tianlan's shoulder calmly, and his palm was warm and strong. In East Island, if you need anything, just tell me. As long as I can provide it, I will never hide it. He paused, and then said softly but seriously, you don't betray Zhongzhou state, and Zhongzhou state will not betray you. Don't betray each other? Li Tianlan laughed at himself for no reason. If that's the case, what happened to the Li family and his father in those days? He took a deep breath and said without changing his expression, I understand. Han Shixuan nodded and said with a smile, that's enough. Some colleagues who came just now are waiting for you in the conference room. Do you have anything you need to put in your residence? If not, let's go to the conference room? Bai Yuming nodded. They held umbrellas and went straight to the conference room under the leadership of Han Shixuan. The conference room that Han Shixuan mentioned was actually a small banquet hall in the club, located at the highest position of the club. When Li Tianlan and others walked into the banquet hall, Tribulation, who was in charge of this operation, had changed into a black robe again. He took off the human skin mask on his face and put on the silver mask again. He stood quietly in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, with his back to everyone. Through the pouring rain outside the window, he was looking at the vague and hazy holy mountain of East Island in the distance. On the mountainside of the active volcano covered with snow, the Divine Wind Force, the Special Warfare Center of East Island, was located. That place could be said to be the most important goal of their trip. There was a screen beside Tribulation, on which appeared the map of East Island. Countless obvious bright spots were flashing on the map, and no one knew what they meant. They went straight into the banquet hall. The moment they crossed the threshold, Bai Yuming, who was walking beside Li Tianlan, paused, intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan, who didn't realize this at all, kept walking into the hall. Bai Yuming and others followed him closely, surrounding him as he moved forward. For a moment, almost everyone's eyes fell on Li Tianlan's face. Confusion, surprise, thoughtfulness, all kinds of eyes with complicated meanings. The enchanting and dangerous Bai Yuming, the mighty and tall Su Chu, Li Beidian with illusory sword intent, Ning Chenxing who was silent and indifferent, Yu Qingyan who was as clear as water, and Yi Huayu who carried a long sword. Everyone followed behind Li Tianlan. In an instant, Li Tianlan stood alone in front of them, which was almost a little dazzling. Bai Yuming smiled gently. She didn't want Han Shixuan to call Li Tianlan a young heavenly son, but in her heart, her brother was no different from Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and others. Since he was a young heavenly son, he should have the grandeur of a young heavenly son. Li Tianlan finally realized something, but he kept his composure and kept moving forward. There was a huge and exaggerated table in the banquet hall, which was obviously moved here temporarily. Li Tianlan didn't care about the position, so he went to an empty seat and sat down. Under the focus of everyone's eyes, his expression didn't change at all. His gentle and calm eyes swept back one by one. His momentum wasn't fierce, but he didn't give in or feel uneasy either. Most people retracted their gazes. Only 2 people were still looking at Li Tianlan. Both of them were extremely young, and their seats were relatively casual. One of them was handsome and had a slender figure. He exuded a warm and modest aura from head to toe. His body was more steady than sharp. Rather than calling him a young genius, it was better to call him a young scholar. The other person was also young, about 23 or 24 years old. He looked ordinary and wore camouflage clothes without military ranks. He looked like the most ordinary freshman of the Sky Academy, but his eyes were sharp. When the light in his eyes moved, it gave people a feeling of sharpness and danger. The 3 people looked at each other and nodded slightly, but their eyes were full of indifference. Han Shixuan just said that 2 wind and thunder veins and 1 heavenly king heart were all in East Island. To be exact, they should all be in Dongdu, in this conference room. Wang Xianxia, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. A young heavenly son. Chapter 138. When Li Tianlan and the others sat down, the elites of the Sky Academy were officially present. The heavy rain outside the window beat the ground wantonly. The room was dim, and the electronic map of East Island beside Tribulation was more conspicuous. Everyone is here. Yi Fengqing, who was sitting on the lower left of the main seat, glanced around, looked at Tribulation, who was still staring at the snow-white holy mountain in the distance, and reported. At the beginning, when the plan of Zhongzhou State was still being discussed by the higher-ups, when it was determined that the Sky Academy would be the leader of the action in Dongdu, the Southeast group very much hoped that Yi Fengqing could take the lead of the trip to Dongdu. Yi Fengqing was frivolous and unruly, but he was not a fool. On the contrary, he was very good at scheming. When the time came, he would be matched with a steady and prudent deputy, which could be said to be the best combination for the trip to Dongdu. The national plan with the strength of a country was of great importance, and the Southeast group did not avoid it. After recommending Yi Fengqing, it also recommended Lieutenant General Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, the largest and most mysterious special forces of Zhongzhou State, to be Yi Fengqing's deputy. This proposal was excellent purely for the sake of official business, and it was even discussed at the meeting of the decision-making committee. However, the candidate recommended by the Sky Academy was Tribulation. Yi Fengqing might be better able to preside over the overall situation, but in terms of combat capability, Tribulation was far ahead of Yi Fengqing. As for the actions of the Dark World, everything could be ignored except for strength. So the final result was that Tribulation was in charge of the action in Dongdu and even the whole East Island, and Yi Fengqing was the deputy. As for the Shadow Sting Force, it was put on the second list to go to East Island. No one knew what Yi Fengqing thought, but at least on the surface, his attitude towards Tribulation was relatively respectful, and there was no knot in his heart. You preside over it. Tribulation looked at the holy mountain in the distance and suddenly said. Yi Fengqing raised his eyebrows slightly. Before he spoke, Tribulation's figure had disappeared, leaving only an almost invisible shadow in place. I'll go to the mountain and have a look. His voice echoed in the room, hoarse and erratic. On the mountain. There was no doubt that Tribulation was going to climb the holy mountain of East Island to see the actual situation of the divine wind force. According to reliable sources, Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengcangquan, two of the three grandmasters in East Island, had already entered Zhongzhou State. But the palace master of Yuehua Palace, who was also the only supreme ninja in East Island, stayed in the holy mountain all year round to oversee the divine wind force. Was it too risky for Tribulation to explore the divine wind force under the nose of an invincible realm ninja? Tribulation's figure disappeared, and his shadow gradually became faint. Yi Fengqing was silent for a while before he raised his head and looked at Han Shishun, who was walking behind Li Tianlan and the others. He said with a smile, Director Han, please introduce them to us. All right. Han Shishun closed the door of the banquet hall, responded calmly, and walked directly to the screen in front of the conference table. He reached out his hand and tapped on the screen. The map on the screen quickly zoomed in. A map of the entire eastern capital appeared on the screen, eventually taking up the entire screen. All that was left were the countless red dots flashing on the screen of the eastern capital map. They were densely packed and varied in brightness. Everyone. Han Shishun coughed softly, looked at the audience, and said slowly, Night Spirit is a force that East Island secretly supports. For decades, East Island's support for Night Spirit is far more than that of the Divine Wind Force. It gathered the power of the entire East Island and built it into a superpower in the Dark World. This is no secret, and I think everyone knows about it. And these, he reached out his hand and pointed at the screen, saying blandly, these red marks are all the forces of Night Spirit in Eastern Capital. Note that it's only the forces of Night Spirit in Eastern Capital, not the whole East Island. Everyone looked at the screen in front of them in silence. Countless red dots flashed on the screen, and vaguely, They had a tendency to cover all the important areas of the city, which was dazzling. The foundation of night spirit in East Island could be seen from these red dots alone. But no one felt pressured. Almost everyone was thinking about what it would be like if these red dots represented the forces of Zhongzhou State in East Island. Just thinking about such a prospect made everyone's blood boil. Han Shixuan reached out his hand again and clicked on the screen. A large number of red dots on the screen suddenly dimmed, leaving about 30 or 40 dots flashing slightly. He looked at the red marks on the map and continued to say, "In the more than a month since the fall of Night Spirit, the government of East Island has reacted as soon as possible. Before the fall of Night Spirit, it was the top superpower in the whole dark world, and its influence spread across all countries. Now, it's hard for East Island to take back too much of Night Spirit's forces outside, but their government is determined to take back the forces inside East Island. In the past month, the Divine Wind Force has been moving very frequently. We have received reliable information that under the instruction of the royal family and the cabinet, the military of East Island, the special warfare system, the underworld, and even the business and political circles are nibbling away the foundation left by Night Spirit. At their current speed, they can barely control the foundation of Night Spirit in East Island in a year at most. In 3 years at most, they can win people's hearts and change the blood inside. After that, all of this will be firmly controlled by the government of East Island." Han Shixuan's palm seemed to touch a red dot casually. The map grew bigger again. On the increasingly dazzling red, a picture of a middle-aged man popped up on the screen. This was a middle-aged man in his 40s, with a goatee and a bald head. He was wearing a kimono, looking gloomy and serious. Tsuruta Yamamoto. Han Shixuan looked at the picture and introduced him. The director of the intelligence department of Yamaguchi-gumi. About 25 days ago, Tsuruta Yamamoto had confirmed his resignation from Yamaguchi-gumi and became the leader of Dongdu Audiovisual Group. Han Shixuan paused and continued, "Let me introduce you. Dongdu Audiovisual Group is one of the largest civilian intelligence organizations in Dongdu. It is the eyes and ears of Night Spirit in Dongdu. Its members are extremely complicated and spread all over the world. Their headquarters is located in Dongdu, but they have been expanding in the past decade. Within the territory of East Island, their development potential is very amazing. And Tsuruta Yamamoto has always been one of the backbone figures of the Yamamoto family. It is impossible for him to betray the Yamamoto family or Yamaguchi-gumi. Now he has taken over Dongdu Audiovisual Group. Everyone should know what this means." He clicked again, and another red dot zoomed in. This time, 3 pictures appeared on the screen at the same time. This place is the headquarters of Shitian Financial Group. Han Shixuan looked at the screen and narrowed his eyes. At this moment, the old agent who had been lurking in East Island for many years finally shed the shrewdness and cunning of a businessman. He exuded a sharp and precise temperament. Shitian Financial Group was a consortium that rose in East Island about 20 years ago. It didn't have a lot of resources, but it was extremely powerful. It was one of the biggest ATMs of Night Spirit in East Island. After Night Spirit was destroyed, these 2 people in the picture entered Shitian Financial Group almost immediately. The one in the middle is Shitian Ingji, the current patriarch of the Shitian clan. The one on the left is from the logistics department of the Divine Wind Force. The one on the right used to be a senior official of the Ministry of Finance of East Island. Han Shixuan retracted the red, clicked on another one, and continued the introduction. Everyone listened attentively and attentively. This series of introductions was almost the process of all parties in East Island nibbling away or gathering all the foundations of Night Spirit in East Island in the past month. It was orderly and not messy at all. Everything seemed extremely orderly. Han Shixuan didn't finish the introduction of these red dots. He introduced about 8 or 9 people and then stopped talking. Yi Fengqing, who had been listening carefully, saw Han Shixuan stop. He smiled and said, "The things that Director Han didn't introduce are basically the same as what he introduced before. Everyone, tell me, what do you think?" "These are nodes." As soon as Yi Fengqing's voice fell, Bai Yuming, who was sitting next to Li Tianlan, already said solemnly, "These things that Director Han introduced are all the important foundations of Night Spirit in East Island, involving intelligence, finance, armaments, underworld, military, and other fields. As long as you control one of these nodes, you can influence an industry that belongs to Night Spirit. The things that Director Han didn't introduce must be the same. Those marked in red on the screen should be the most important industries of Night Spirit in Dongdu. Controlling these means controlling the foundation of Night Spirit in Dongdu. East Island is so fast. Not only fast, but also very stable. I think even inside Night Spirit, there won't be much resistance for the East Island government to take over all this." Gu Yunxia's face was a little gloomy, and she said heavily, "These nodes are a net together. As long as East Island really controls these, our trip will be in vain." "I guess it's the same in other places in East Island, right?" Horsewoman asked slowly after a moment of silence. "It's better in other places. It happens suddenly and in a short time. East Island is slowly planning, and it's impossible to achieve the situation in Dongdu without a few months." Han Shishuan smiled, and he didn't refuse to answer the question because of Horsewoman's foreign identity. "And even in Dongdu, this net still has a lot of problems." Yi Fengqing continued, "East Island acts very fast, but after all, the time is too short and the remaining forces of Night Spirit may not really accept the incorporation of the East Island government. Every king has his own courtiers. This is a universal truth. Their behavior is just an expedient measure forced by the form. At present, although this net has been formed, it's not strong, and there's a possibility of destruction." "Destruction?" The enchantress slightly raised her eyebrows. "Yes, it's destruction." Yi Fengqing nodded, and took out a few pieces of folded information from his arms. "I have a few lists here. This is our first phase of the battle plan, codenamed Hunting. The content is to hunt all over East Island. The plan of the army headquarters in Kunlun City is to send a few small but extremely elite hunting teams to hunt all over East Island in a month, and completely tear up the net woven by East Island." He patted the information in his hand, and said in a decisive tone, 180 people, none of them can live." Everyone at the meeting felt a chill in their hearts. In the silence, Yi Fengqing glanced around, and said with a chuckle, "These 180 people are the top talents in all aspects of East Island, and they are very professional. But there are not many whose strength is above the thunder-shocking realm. So for this action, the army headquarters in Kunlun City have decided that all of you will form a hunting team. This is our first battle since we entered East Island. Everyone, who would like to volunteer?" Silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Half a minute. As Yi Fengqing subconsciously squinted his eyes, a voice suddenly spoke. To be precise, there were 3 voices, but they were combined. It sounded more like the same person was speaking. "I'll go." Everyone's heart skipped a beat, and there was a strange feeling rising in their hearts. There were 3 people. And they were the 3 people who had a special meaning among the young generation of the whole Zhongzhou state. Wang Xianxia from the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanshan from Kunlun City. Li Tianlan from Sai City. 2 had the wind and thunder veins, and 1 had the heavenly king heart. Li Tianlan might not have the title of a young heavenly son yet, but no one could deny that he had the potential of a young heavenly son. Heavenly sons were born in troubled times. Heavenly sons were born in the general trend. Would the battle of the heavenly sons of the young generation of Zhongzhou State start from today in Dongdu? The other students of the Sky Academy looked at each other, and no one spoke. Even Li Beidan and Ning Qianxing were silent. In front of these 3 people, everyone in the young generation seemed to have a sense of inferiority. This was a competition that only belonged to the 3 of them. It seemed that the others were not qualified at all. The 3 of them stood up at the same time. As they looked at each other, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became oppressive. Bai Yuming, Horsewoman, and Flaming Fire frowned at the same time, but Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao had already stood up at the same time. It was too outrageous to ask Li Tianlan to sit back down, so they could only remain silent. "I ask to act alone." Wang Xingxiao's momentum was still gentle and modest, but every syllable in his words revealed great confidence. Well, act alone. Gu Hanshan looked calm. He was really a person who was hard to be noticed, but once he spoke, his sharpness was no less than that of the gentle and modest Wang Xingxiao. Yi Fengqing had narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan calmly. Wang Xingxiao had now broken through to the thundershocking realm. A thundershocking realm, wind and thunder veins could indeed ask to act alone. Gu Hanshan was now also in the fulfillment of the fire-flaming realm. Although the Heavenly King Heart could not directly increase combat effectiveness, it had various wonderful functions, not simply improving willpower. With the Heavenly King Heart, Gu Hanshan might not be the best fighter among the young generation, but he was definitely the most difficult to kill. It was not a problem for him to act alone. And Li Tianlan, although he had the wind and thunder veins, his realm was too low after all. It was understandable that he asked to act in a team, but if he really did so, others would inevitably be disappointed. The task was to survive, but some things were not unimportant. It depended on how Li Tianlan chose. Well, act alone. Under everyone's gaze, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and chuckled, but his eyes were a little cold when he looked at Wang Xingxiao. The young heavenly son of the Wang family of Beihai, now the top expert of the young generation in Zhongzhou state, asked to act alone, which was equivalent to digging a pit for him. And it was a pit that he had to jump into. Li Tianlan smiled and said no more. Yi Fengqing took a deep look at the three people, nodded, and said in a deep voice, "Okay." On this day, after the meeting, in the heavy rain of Dongdu, Li Tianlan walked out of the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club with the sky attack on his back and the human emperor in his hand. The three heavenly sons of the young generation in Zhongzhou state set off in different directions and began to hunt. In the heavy rain, Li Tianlan took out a bottle of potion and drank it, expressionless. A fire rose in the heavy rain and broke through the curtain of rain. Chapter 139. In the eyes of the dark world, Shinjuku was undoubtedly the most famous place in Dongdu. Not only was the Dongdu government located in Shinjuku, but also the headquarters or extremely important branches of the major gangs in East Island. It was also the place with the densest special warfare agencies in East Island. In this small area, there were nearly 60 special warfare agencies gathered together, with the names of certain companies or societies in front of everyone. What was equally interesting was that Kabukicho, known as the largest red light district in Asia, was also located in Shinjuku. Nearly 6,000 bars, clubs, and massage parlors were crowded together, which was a paradise for all men. Crooks mixed with honest people. This was the current situation of Shinjuku. Walking on the streets of Shinjuku, there were only 5 kinds of people you would most likely encounter: tourists from all over the world, East Island government personnel, gang members, prostitutes, and East Island agents. This was Shinjuku, mixed but not chaotic, a funny and somewhat incredible place. From morning to night, the heavy rain in Dongdu continued, and it was even getting heavier. There were no crowds on the streets of Shinjuku, but the traffic was endless. All kinds of neon lights were flashing on the streets, and the whole Shinjuku looked a kind of blurred temptation. In the heavy rain, a young man with an umbrella walked into a roadside restaurant with a slightly hurried pace. He put away the umbrella in his hand, found a table at random, and sat down. The young man's appearance was ordinary. At best, his clean and delicate face would not attract any attention in the crowd. However, his eyes were extremely bright, and his expression was calm and gentle. He was carrying a long silver metal box on his back as he sat on the seat with a peaceful expression. Perhaps it was because of the weather, the business in the restaurant was extremely quiet. Seeing that there were guests coming in, a waitress with faint freckles on her face and a pretty and decent appearance walked over quickly and said something in Japanese with a gentle and respectful tone. The young man, who looked less than 20 years old, opened his mouth, pointed to his mouth, and smiled. His eyes were clear and a little apologetic, and he seemed to be mute. The waitress was stunned, and she felt a little sorry for him for no reason. She bowed to him and handed the menu to the young mute in front of her with both hands. Mute opened the menu but did not look at it in detail. After pointing at the Japanese-style hot pot on the menu, he seemed to feel that it was not enough. However, due to his lack of money, he could not afford to order more meat. He simply ordered a few rice balls and then handed the menu back to the waiter. The waiter silently noted it down. She told him to wait for a moment before turning around and entering the kitchen. The young man seemed to be mute, but he wasn't deaf. After nodding, he took out a neatly folded piece of information from his pocket and silently read it. Sanluan Tingjing, male, 39 years old, was originally a senior priest of Amaterasu Shrine, a standard militarist, and the current leader of Spirit Moon Special Operations Team. He is at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. He is perverse and cruel, fond of women. He has tortured and killed many women in the name of a priest. He is a complete psychopath. A short summary was written at the top of the document, and below the summary was a photo less than 2 inches in size. A middle-aged man with a hazy expression appeared in the photo with narrowed eyes, making people feel extremely uncomfortable. Below the photo was the recent information about Sanluan Tingjing and his current residence. The young, mute, narrowed his eyes and watched silently, not saying a word for a long time. "Penman, are you in Shinjuku?" There was a rustling sound in his ears, and then Bai Yoming's voice came directly through a micro-communication device. The young, mute, glanced around calmly. It was raining heavily outside, and he was the only one in the restaurant at this time. An East Island man, who looked to be in his 40s or 50s, was calculating the accounts behind the counter. It seemed that he was the owner of the restaurant. He lowered his eyelids and answered calmly, Sanluan Tingjing? Bai Yoming's voice came again. The communication device in Li Tianlan's ear was actually a translator, with a remote communication and positioning device. Li Tianlan didn't understand Japanese, so he hunted alone in East Island. Language was a great trouble most of the time. This translation device could be said to be what he needed most in East Island. The device was small in size and could be stuffed into the ear, but the signal was extremely sharp and clear. Within a range of 20 meters, as long as it was not whispering, the translator could basically collect all the information and give feedback. It was even more convenient than a real ear. Li Tianlan was acting alone. He didn't need to speak at all. He just needed to be able to listen. This little thing was just right for him. Sanluan Tingjing. Bai Yoming hesitated a little and said softly, "That's the power of the shrine." Now, the young waiter had brought the hot pot over. Li Tianlan ate in silence and didn't speak. He didn't wonder why Bai Yoming knew the goal of his trip. In the hunting operation, Yi Fengqing divided about 90 assassination targets, accounting for half of the total quota of 180 people. Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Li Tianlan each got 30 people. Although the people were different, the difficulty was roughly the same. Intentionally or unintentionally, Yi Fengqing didn't consider the realm gap between Li Tianlan and the first two. If it wasn't because Director Yi expected and valued Li Tianlan, then the meaning behind it was somewhat meaningful. The list of 90 people assigned by the three of them was far more important than the 90 people behind them. There were many masters and they weighed a lot. If all the 90 people were successfully hunted, as the nodes disappeared one after another, the net woven by the East Island government would be mostly paralyzed. As for the other 90 people, they might be important, but their strength was relatively average, and their backgrounds were more complicated. It was most suitable for other trainees to hunt such people, and it wouldn't take up too much of the three of them's energy. In the list Li Tianlan got, there were 13 people in East Island at this time, and the rest were scattered in cities such as Ninghu, Changdao, Sendai, and Nagoya. Among the 13 people in Dongdu, 4 of them were in Shinjuku, occupying 4 directions respectively. Sanluan Tingjing was in the north of Shinjuku. Since Bai Yoming could see his location information, it was not difficult to guess who he was going to attack. "It's okay." Li Tianlan took a bite of meat and said in a very low voice. The power of the shrine in East Island was extremely powerful. This was originally a country with a high theocratic status. Although the theocratic status of East Island was under the regime and the imperial power, It was definitely a force that could not be ignored. Shintoism, Amaterasu Shrine, Ise Grand Shrine, Ishikami Shrine, and all kinds of shrines stood in great numbers, which could be regarded as a force that could not be ignored in the special warfare system of East Island. A large number of shrines in East Island had very close ties with Yasukuni Shrine, which represented the militarists of the right-wing forces. Over the years, they had even united with the right-wing forces. It could be said that they were the most radical forces inside East Island. At present, with the destruction of Night Spirit, East Island's right to speak in the Dark World had also suffered a major or even a heavy blow. The government of East Island was likely to select some people and release them after integrating the foundation of Night Spirit in East Island. The right-wing forces and the Shrine forces were not suitable to hold important positions on the surface because they were too radical, but the Dark World was definitely the best stage for them to play. The fact that Sanluan Tingjing controlled the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was a signal. The Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was not a behemoth, and its level was not too high. Seriously speaking, it was at most equivalent to an agency at the level of a department or bureau in Zhongzhou State. But the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was extremely special. It was a semi-official organization. To put it bluntly, it was one of the local dark forces of East Island. What was the Dark World? It was not a real world. To be exact, wherever there were people of the Dark World, there was the Dark World. It was the same as where there were people, there would be Jianghu. In the hearts of ordinary people, this world was an ordinary, calm, and bright world. But in the eyes of some killers, agents, mercenaries, and so on, this world was the Dark World everywhere. The purpose of the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was to deal with the masters of the Dark World with bad intentions in East Island. Under normal circumstances, there were only about 100 elites and staff in the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group. But as long as it was needed, countless masters of the special warfare system in East Island could enter these similar semi-official organizations and contribute to the country in their own names. The Spirit Moon Special Operations Group had even been borrowed by a master of the Invincible Realm. The importance of such an organization was self-evident. Li Tianlan put Sanluan Tingjing first on the hunting list, not only because Sanluan Tingjing's strength and position added up to 200 credits. After carefully watching the 13 preys in Dongdu, he had a general plan in his mind. Among the 13 people, there was one master at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm and 2 masters at the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking Realm. 2 masters at the fulfillment of the Fire Flaming Realm. 4 masters at the Fire Flaming Realm. As for the remaining 4, one was in the Ice Condensing Realm, and the other 3 were ordinary people who didn't know martial arts. Not to mention the Dongdu area, there were not many masters of the Thundershocking Realm and the Fire Flaming Realm on the complete list of 30 people in his hand. The reason why he chose Sanluan Tingjing was that his strength was high enough. It was better to kill him in the early stage of such a tricky task. Otherwise, when the 3 of them hunted all over East Island would be shocked, and some smart people would figure out their purpose. At that time, if they planned to assassinate the masters on the list, it would be a little difficult. Fire Flaming Realm and Thundershocking Realm. Li Tianlan thought about these 2 realms, which could be regarded as masters anywhere, and there was a dead silence in his eyes. At the beginning of the hunt, he had already taken the surge potion that Qin Weibai brought back for him through Horsewoman. In the following period, he would always have the strength of the stabilization phase of the Fire Flaming Realm. Although it was still 1 or 2 small realms lower than his previous peak strength, he had made a major breakthrough in the Qi-controlling realm before he set off from the Sky Academy. Now, during the period of the effect of the potion, if Li Tianlan gave it his all, he was not sure how terrifying his combat capability would be. Sanluan Tingjing. Li Tianlan looked at the photo on the information in his hand, narrowed his eyes, and smiled. Not only Sanluan Tingjing, but the entire theocratic force in East Island would be his priority hunting target this time. First, he would destroy the arrogance of this powerful force with a deep foundation in East Island, which would be of great benefit to his next action. In a word, you must be careful. Yi Fengqing, the old fox, and the little fox of the Wang family of Beihai pushed you to this point together. If you can't do it, you can just withdraw. Those two people don't have good intentions. Bai Yuming continued. Li Tianlan gave a soft hum again. Bai Yuming suddenly changed the topic and said playfully, I forgot to tell you that people from the Deep Sea Academy are here. Well, Rushi is beside me. She wants to talk to you. Do you want to have a chat? You are engaged. Although you haven't seen each other, it's good to cultivate a relationship first. Li Tianlan stopped breathing, and his eyes were complicated. There was a silence on the other end of the communication, and then a cold but tender voice sounded. It was soft and sounded a little complicated. Qin Weibai's voice was also very cold, but compared with this voice, it had two different styles. Qin Weibai was really cold and indifferent, with a kind of high and mighty holiness and ethereal. But now this voice was still cold, but there was a kind of indescribable arrogance in it. Her voice seemed to be deliberately soft, but the arrogance was still clear and obvious. Be careful. Be careful. Dongqing Rushi said. It seemed that she had done her duty as a fiancée. The next second, she directly cut off the communication. Dongqing Rushi. Chapter 140. After a big dinner, before the restaurant closed, Li Tianlan walked into the rain again with an umbrella. The humidity was thick in the night. The rainstorm was getting heavier and heavier, and the bean-sized raindrops fell on the umbrella. The umbrella trembled violently, making people feel unsteady. The street lights on the cold road were still on, and there was dense water vapor beside the light, making it hazy. The whole Takeshita street seemed to be isolated from the world in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan walked on the street unhurriedly with an umbrella, looking lonely and lonely. Takeshita Street was a clear stream in Shinjuku. Located in the north of Shinjuku, the road was wide. Not to mention when it was raining, even in the cloudless day, this street could be said to be the coldest and quietest street in Dongdu. There were no messy bars and clubs on the street. There were no noisy gangs. There were only a few restaurants, shops, a supermarket, and a small and medium-sized hospital. In addition to these necessary living places, the entire Takeshita Street was only left with some companies and societies that occupied a large area but did not even have a clear introduction of the specific work. These companies and societies that did not even have clear basic responsibilities were the real masters of Takeshita Street, or the protagonists. There were a total of 56 special warfare agencies in the Shinjuku area of Tokyo, and more than 30 of them had their headquarters set up on Takeshita Street. Nearly 5,000 special warfare operations personnel and special warfare intelligence personnel lived here, trained, and lived. When there was no large-scale operation, the whole clean street looked cold and desolate. More than 5,000 special warfare system personnel. If all of them were dispatched, Takeshita Street might become a real dragnet in an instant. Li Tianlan walked quietly along the street. His expression was getting calmer and calmer, and the road ahead was getting darker and darker. The street lights hundreds of meters ahead were completely out. Li Tianlan stopped. The street lights on Takeshita Street were on for 300 meters, and the rest was completely dark, which meant that he had officially entered the densest area of special warfare forces on Takeshita Street. This kind of darkness was liked by all killers, but the place in front of him was obviously not suitable for lurking, because in the darkness ahead, at least tens of thousands of high-definition cameras scattered in different positions were working 24 hours a day, covering the second half of Takeshita Street for thousands of meters. It was a complete joke to lurk in such a place. The street was silent and strange, and there seemed to be only the sound of rain between heaven and earth. Li Tianlan stopped where he was, leaning against the wall. In the heavy rain, lightning streaked across the sky, followed by muffled thunder. At the moment when the sky and earth turned pale under the lightning, Li Tianlan loosened the umbrella in his hand and casually pulled off the pitch-black umbrella cover. The torrential rain fell instantly. Li Tianlan, who was already in the fire-flaming realm, did not use flames to evaporate the rain around him. He saved every bit of his combat strength and let the rain drench his whole body. He took out the silver box that he had been carrying on his back. He covered part of it with a pitch-black umbrella and wrapped the other part with a black coat. After doing all this, he put the box back on his back and quickly moved forward while sticking close to the wall. A flurry of footsteps could be heard in the torrential rain. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly stopped where he was, but the little puddle of water under his feet instantly whistled forward. The ripples kept spreading forward, pushing the water higher and higher, and countless water droplets flew in the torrential rain. A patrol team in ponchos came out silently from a narrow alley less than 30 meters ahead. Although they looked a little tired, their formation was not chaotic at all. In the second half of Takeshita Street, companies were separated from each other, and there were such small alleys everywhere in the middle. This was undoubtedly the most dangerous hidden danger for security, so the major Secret Service agencies could only form a joint patrol team to patrol every alley 24 hours a day. It was said that many special warfare agencies had jointly issued an application to the Dongdu city government, requesting to demolish the residents in this alley and build the second half of Takeshita Street into an integrated large-scale industrial park. To put it bluntly, it was a super-large training ground, so that the major Secret Service agencies could gather together completely without any hindrance. This report not only went to the Dongdu city government, but also to the cabinet. The cabinet had approved it, and nearby residents had begun to move. Once this plan was formed, the patrol force in the second half of Takeshita Street would be greatly reduced, but the degree of safety would be greatly improved, and the difficulty of sneaking would skyrocket. But before the demolition was completed, every patrol team had to stick to their duties. With the rigid and serious nature of East Islanders in their bones, even if they were patrolling in their own territory, every patrol team would show the vigilance of a war. A lot of water splashed into the entrance of the alley with the raindrops. A patrol team of 5 people happened to appear. Countless splashes of water splashed on the raincoats of the patrol team, and the wind whistled. "What's that?" There was a cry of surprise, and the 5 people turned their heads at the same time to look in the direction from which the water splashed. And Li Tianlan, who had been standing there, had disappeared. In the alley behind the patrol team, the splashes gathered and turned into a shadow. Li Tianlan's figure had changed places with the shadow, clinging to the wall, motionless. The patrol team muttered, and they didn't think much about it since they didn't see anything and continued to patrol. Li Tianlan clung to the wall and moved quickly in the alley, constantly approaching his target location. The Spirit Moon Special Warfare Group was in the middle and front part of the second half of Takeshita Street, about a kilometer away from here. After more than a dozen alleys, he would almost arrive there. Li Tianlan moved quickly and kept changing places with the shadow. His figure was never exposed in the open space. He was always clinging to the wall, with his back against the wall behind him, avoiding the few commanding heights nearby, and kept moving forward. Elite patrols, densely packed cameras, and a sniper on a high vantage point. If he was discovered by any one of them, he would be exposed at the first time, and he would even face the encirclement and interception of more than 5,000 elites in the shortest time. Li Tianlan didn't want to see the target not die, but things had come to this point. Moreover, Sanluan Tingjing was cruel and cunning. If the assassination failed this time, it would be even more difficult to kill him in the future. At that time, it would be more difficult to kill him than today. There was another flurry of footsteps. Li Tianlan's shadow swayed slightly, and he disappeared quickly. Now his shadow formula could be said to have reached the basic level in terms of power and change. The distance of the shadow released was about 40 meters. As long as he was careful enough and used the shadow formula here, the possibility of him being discovered was very small. Passing by the second patrol team, Li Tianlan didn't stop and continued to move forward. The direction and terrain of this trip kept appearing in his mind, as if a map was gradually becoming clear and complete. Kill with one blow. Retreat and scathe. How could he retreat? He moved forward in the alley, observing the surrounding terrain, silently remembering the movement patterns of the patrol team, and then working out the retreat route before taking action. This was what an excellent assassin should do. Li Tianlan was not an assassin before. But now he was on an assassination mission, so he was an assassin. The surrounding alleys were gradually restored in his mind. Li Tianlan's pace was getting faster and faster, and he deliberately avoided the commanding heights all the way. After passing by 6 patrol teams, he finally entered the factory of the Spirit Moon Society. The layout of the factory was clean and elegant, with all the woods and flower beds. Li Tianlan moved along the woods and finally stopped at the forefront of the woods. 200 meters in front of him was a villa, which was brightly lit. But what made Li Tianlan frown slightly was that the distance of 200 meters was empty except for a flower bed in the middle. The nearby snipers might not react very quickly, but it was impossible for them to let him rush over a distance of 200 meters without discovering his existence. He had to be fast. Li Tianlan tightened the box on his back and took a deep breath. After a nearby patrol team passed by, he suddenly rushed out of the woods. The distance of 5 meters was crossed almost in one step. 30 meters away, a shadow was formed. Switch. Changing positions. Li Tianlan's figure flickered in an instant. 3 shadows appeared and disappeared almost at the same time, and Li Tianlan's figure had appeared inside the flower bed 100 meters away. Li Tianlan's breathing was slightly rapid. Releasing 3 shadows in a row didn't consume much of his physical strength, but it consumed a lot of his willpower. But in the flower bed, his eyes were getting brighter and brighter. After a short rest, Li Tianlan's figure moved, and another shadow was about to rise. A beam of light came directly from outside the factory. A black car cut through the rain. A black Lexus entered the factory and finally stopped in front of the villa in the middle of the factory. The door opened, and 2 men in black suits got out with umbrellas. They opened the driver's compartment in the back of the car, took out 2 oversized suitcases from inside, and walked quickly into the villa. The moment the door of the villa closed, a shadow appeared on the side of the car, perfectly avoiding the commanding heights. After a short rest, another shadow appeared on the rooftop of the villa. Li Tianlan, dressed in black, lay tightly on the rooftop and moved slowly. The rain was heavy, but now as long as the snipers at the nearby commanding heights paid a little attention to him, even through the rain curtain, it was not difficult to find Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan opened the silver box behind him. Instead of taking the sky attack, he pulled out a small metal cylinder from the box, stretched it out, and gently inserted it into the ceiling. The cylinder suddenly pierced the hard ceiling, like a knife cutting tofu, silently. The signal light above the cylinder lit up, and Li Tianlan turned on a small screen temporarily installed inside the box. Through the ceiling, everything in the villa suddenly appeared on the screen. A middle-aged man whom Li Tianlan was familiar with but looked gloomier in real life than in photos appeared on the screen, with a cruel and perverted smile. Sanluan Tingjing. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and remained calm. 2 men in black suits carrying large suitcases had entered the villa and bowed deeply to Sanluan Tingjing. "Open it," Sanluan Tingjing said with a smile. "Let me see the toys tonight." The 2 men in black suits squatted down with smiling faces and opened the box directly. Sure enough, there were toys in the box. 2 slender women in shorts were curled up in the suitcase, revealing their snow-white and tender thighs. They were struggling with all their might. Their mouths were taped shut, and they could only make muffled sounds. Their eyes were filled with terror. "Priest, these are 2 women from Zhongzhou State. They came to East Island to travel. Are you satisfied with them?" A man in a black suit said carefully with a smiling face. Sanluan Tingjing smiled, squatted down, grabbed the long black hair of a woman in the box, lifted her up, and tore off the tape on her mouth. The woman screamed subconsciously. Sanluan Tingjing had already bent down and kissed the woman's rosy little mouth hard. The woman's eyes widened, and her pure and beautiful face had been completely deformed. Her eyes were full of fear. Sanluan Tingjing bit hard, and the woman's lips suddenly bled. He licked the blood on the corner of his mouth slightly and said with a sinister smile, "Yes, Ashina Sao. It's most interesting to torture and kill." Torture and kill? When the woman heard this word, she trembled more and more severely. "You 2 stay and play together." Sanluan Tingjing smiled, looked at the 2 women in front of him, and said softly, "The rain outside is too heavy. Don't be afraid. I'll play a game with you tonight." It's a very fun game. Bang! At the same time, a dull and violent gunshot, which could only belong to a sniper rifle, suddenly sounded outside the window. Li Tianlan rolled over subconsciously. In his original position, gravel splashed, and a bullet hole appeared directly. Bang! The second shot sounded again. Without hesitation, Li Tianlan grabbed the box with the sky attack on his back and punched the ceiling directly. Boom! You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.